She was born without a wolf, but her secret silver blood made the cruel Alpha King. Bo. The bucket slipped from Serafina's hands before she could stop it. Cold water spread across the stone floor of the main hall, soaking the hem of her dress and creeping toward the boots of the pack elder, who was already watching her with that familiar look, the one that sat somewhere between pity and disgust. She dropped to her knees immediately, pressing the cloth she always carried to the wet stones, wiping fast, keeping her head down, making herself small. It was something she had learned to do very well over the years, making herself small, taking up less space, breathing quieter, existing with as little notice as possible. "Clumsy girl," the elder muttered, stepping around the water and moving on without another word. Serafina kept wiping. She was 18 years old, and she had been cleaning floors in the Ashvale pack for as long as she could remember. Not because she was weak, not because she lacked intelligence. She cleaned floors because the pack had decided, long ago, that this was where she belonged. At the bottom, in the corners, out of sight. The Ashvale pack lived deep in the mountain forests of the north, far from the nearest human town, tucked between two ridges where the pine trees grew so thick the sun barely touched the ground. It was a proud community, more than 300 wolves, organized and hierarchical the way all packs were. At the top was the Alpha, a heavy-set man named Gregor, who had inherited his position from his father, and who ruled mostly by intimidation. Below him were the Betas, the warriors, the hunters, the craftspeople, and then at the very bottom, the Omegas, those who served, who cooked, who cleaned, who kept the pack running while receiving the least of everything in return. Serafina was not even officially ranked as an Omega. She occupied a category that the pack did not have a proper name for. She was simply the wolfless girl. Every wolf in the pack remembered their first shift. They talked about it constantly, where they were, how it felt, the moment the animal inside them finally burst free. It was the central event of a wolf's life, a defining moment that divided everything into before and after. Children shifted for the first time between 13 and 16 years old. It was considered late if it happened at 17. If it had not happened by 18, something was considered very wrong. Serafina had turned 18 4 months ago. She had never shifted. She had never felt anything stir inside her. No animal consciousness pressing against her mind. No urge to run on 4 legs beneath a full moon. Nothing. Just herself, quiet and human feeling, in a world of wolves. She had been waiting for years. Had gone to sleep on her 13th birthday, certain that she would wake up different. Certain that the wolf her father had promised her was simply running a little late. Her father had told her once, when she was very small, that some gifts arrived slowly, but arrived more powerfully for the wait. She had held on to those words, through every year that passed without a shift. She had turned them over in her mind at night, the way a person turns over a smooth stone, finding comfort in the familiar weight of it. Her father's name was Owen Voss. He had been the beta of the Ashvale pack, second in command, respected, capable, a wolf who moved through the world with quiet authority. He had died in a territorial skirmish when Serafina was 6 years old, and the pack had mourned him for exactly 3 weeks before moving on. His daughter, however, had not been allowed to move on. She had been moved sideways instead, shifted out of the warm center of pack life into its cold, unnoticed edges. Her mother, Elara, was a gentle woman who had loved Owen deeply and had never quite found her footing after losing him. She worked as a seamstress, quiet and careful, producing neat and invisible work that the pack needed but rarely thanked her for. She worried constantly about Serafina, not in the way that made her speak up or push back, but in the way that made her go very still whenever someone said something cruel about her daughter in the market or the hall. A stillness that Serafina had learned to read as helpless love. Her mother could not protect her. She was trying her best. The other young wolves in the pack had stopped trying to include Serafina in anything around the time she turned 15, and still showed no signs of shifting. It had not been a dramatic exclusion. There had been no single incident, no confrontation. It had simply happened the way cold weather happens, gradually, and then all at once. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations paused when she walked into rooms. The younger children were warned not to spend too much time near the wolfless girl, as if her condition might somehow be catching. She was not entirely without human connection. There was a girl named Nora, 1 year younger than Serafina, who worked alongside her in the kitchens, and who had the rare quality of treating Serafina exactly as she treated everyone else, with straightforward, uncomplicated decency. Nora did not ask about the wolf. She did not avoid the subject dramatically either. She simply talked about other things, and in doing so, created a small, ordinary space that Serafina was grateful for. There was also old Aldrich, the pack's traveling scholar, who passed through Ashvale twice a year, and who had always given Serafina books from his pack, without being asked. He had never explained why. She had never asked. She had simply read every one of them cover to cover. Beyond that, her days were her own company. She woke before sunrise to begin heating water for the pack's morning bathing. She hauled firewood from the stores to the main kitchen before breakfast. She helped prepare food for the warriors and the elder wolves. Before preparing anything for herself, she cleaned the common hall after meals, swept the pathways between the central buildings, and carried messages between households when the pack's younger wolves decided they had better things to do. She did all of this without complaint, not because she had no feelings about it, but because she had learned very early that complaints from a wolfless girl went nowhere except back to her, amplified and used as evidence that she was also difficult. She had plenty of thoughts, though, private ones, thoughts she kept so thoroughly to herself that they had started to feel like a separate inner life, richer than the outer one. She thought about her father, about the way she remembered his voice, low and steady, never raised, never harsh, about the silver ring he used to wear on his right hand that had gone missing after his death and that no one in the pack seemed to know anything about the way he used to look at her when she was very small, with an expression she had not understood then but that she thought about now, something careful in it, something almost worried. She thought about the secret she had been carrying for 3 years. It had started on the night of her 15th birthday. She had been lying on her narrow bed in the small room she shared with nothing but a window, watching the moon through the glass, a new moon night, which meant the sky was very dark, and the stars were very bright, and the forest outside was absolutely quiet, because wolves did not run on new moon nights. Their animals grew quieter when the moon was dark. It was one of the few nights that felt like relief to Serafina, because the pack was less present, less loud, less itself. She had been tracing the lines of her palm in the moonless dark, a habit she had when she could not sleep, and she had noticed it for the first time. A glow, faint and silver white, like the light of a moon that was not there. It came from beneath the skin of her inner wrist, moving with her pulse. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds, and then faded, leaving nothing behind, except the faint warmth of her own blood. She had sat up. She had stared at her wrist for a long time. She had pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and told herself to breathe. She had not shown anyone. The next morning she had gone to her mother, working up to it over an entire day, and finally shown Alara the place where she had seen it glow, pressing her thumb against the vein, and waiting. It had not appeared. It never came on command, but she described it, carefully, watching her mother's face. Alara had gone the color of cold ash. She had taken Serafina's hand in both of hers and held it so tightly that it almost hurt, and she had said, in a voice barely above a breath, "You must never show anyone. Do you understand me? You must never let anyone see." "Why?" Serafina had asked. "What is it?" "It is something very old," Alara had said, "and some things that are very old frighten people very badly. Promise me." She had promised. For 3 years, she had kept that promise perfectly. The glow came irregularly, always on new moon nights, always faint, always brief. Sometimes it appeared in her palms as well, a warmth that moved through her fingers like sunlight through water. She had learned, through careful and private experimentation, that it grew slightly stronger when she was calm, and faded almost entirely when she was frightened. She had also noticed that when it was present, plants near her seemed to lean slightly in her direction, the way plants lean toward a window. Once, a small injured bird had landed on her windowsill during one of these moments and sat completely still, watching her with bright eyes, as if it was waiting for something. She did not know what any of it meant. She knew only that her mother was afraid of it, and that in a pack where she was already treated as lesser, being different in one more way seemed like more than she could survive. So she carried it quietly. She carried most things quietly. The day the royal announcement arrived in Ashvale, Serafina was pulling weeds from the vegetable garden behind the kitchen. She heard the horn first, a long, formal note that meant official business at the gate. and then the sound of boots moving quickly across the courtyard as the Alpha's household scrambled toward the front of the compound. She stayed where she was, her hands in the dirt, because official business at the gate had never once in her life had anything to do with her. It was Nora who brought her the news, appearing at the edge of the garden with wide eyes and a breathless expression. "The Alpha King is coming," Nora said. Serafina sat back on her heels. "When?" "A week from now. He's touring all the territories. Ashvale is on the route." Serafina looked down at the dirt on her hands. "Then I imagine there will be a great deal of cleaning to do." Nora made a face. "Sarah, this is the Alpha King, Kalen Duskmore. Do you know what they say about him?" "I know what they say about him." Everyone knew what they say about him. His name traveled through wolf communities the way weather traveled. You felt it before it arrived. Kalen Duskmore had taken the throne at 17 years old, after the sudden death of his father, the previous king, and had spent 9 years ruling with a level of discipline that some called strength and others called cruelty. He had dissolved 3 packs during his reign, removed their alphas, disbanded their hierarchies, scattered their members to other territories. The reasons, as they reached Ashvale, were always vague and second-hand. He was strict. He was cold. He did not forgive weakness or disorder. He was also, by every report, extraordinarily capable. No pack in his territory had been threatened from outside since he took power. No dark magic incursion had reached any of his communities. Trade was organized, borders were secure, and the annual reviews he conducted were thorough and fair, or so said the wolves who had passed through those reviews without losing anything. But none of that made his visit feel like anything other than a judgment. Alpha Gregor called every member of the pack to the main hall that evening and delivered a speech that lasted 40 minutes and could have been summarized in 4 words: "Do not embarrass us." Warriors were to be presentable, in formation, ready to demonstrate their skill. The hunters were to present their tallies. The craftspeople were to have their best work displayed. The kitchens were to produce outstanding food for the duration of the visit. Then Gregor had looked at Serafina, standing at the back of the hall in her work clothes, and said, almost as an afterthought, "You, stay out of sight during the visit. Work only in the back rooms." She had nodded. She had agreed. She went home and told herself it did not matter. But that night was a new moon night, and she lay in the dark and watched her veins glow silver and thought about what it would mean to be seen, really seen, not pitied or dismissed or managed, but genuinely looked at and recognized as something real. She thought about that for a long time. Then she pressed her glowing fingers gently against the cold stone wall beside her bed, and the faintest warmth moved through the stone beneath her palm, and somewhere outside in the dark garden, a night bird sang a single note. She closed her eyes. The Alpha King was coming. She would stay out of sight. She would do her work in the back rooms, and nothing about his visit would touch her life in any way. She believed this completely, which was perhaps why the universe chose not to warn her that she was entirely wrong. The cart tipped on a loose cobblestone, and Serafina watched in slow horror as 4 large crates of preserved meat slid off the side and hit the courtyard floor with a sound like a small explosion. This was, she thought, possibly the worst timing in the history of her already difficult life. The Alpha King's procession had entered the front gate of the Ashvale compound 40 seconds ago. She had seen the banners from the kitchen window, deep gray with a silver crest, and had pressed herself further into the back corridor, intending to stay exactly where she had been told to stay. But the cart was her responsibility. She had loaded it that morning with the supplies meant for the welcome banquet, and the boy who was supposed to drive it to the storage room beside the main hall had simply not shown up. She had driven it herself, taking the long route around the back of the compound to avoid the procession entirely. Except the long route around the back passed through a narrow side courtyard, and the side courtyard shared a low wall with the main courtyard, and through an unfortunate combination of a loose cobblestone, an uphill slope, and the particular angle at which she had been turning, the cart had decided to announce itself to everyone present. The noise stopped the procession. She was already on her knees, pulling the crates upright, not looking toward the gate, not looking at anything except the task directly in front of her, moving fast and quietly. If she could get this cleaned up in the next 60 seconds, she could back the cart down the corridor and disappear. She was good at disappearing. "Leave it." The voice came from her left. Not loud, not sharp. Just flat and absolute, the way a door closing sounds final. She stopped moving. She did not look up immediately. She had learned over years of pack life that looking up quickly was often taken as a challenge by wolves she was not supposed to challenge. She took one breath and then rose to her feet slowly, keeping her posture neutral, and turned. The man standing 10 feet away was not what she had expected. She had expected someone who looked like power, wide, imposing, filling space through sheer physical presence. She had imagined something like Gregor, but sharper. The man looking at her was tall, yes, and lean in the way that suggested real strength rather than displayed strength. But it was his stillness that hit her first. He was completely, almost unnaturally still. He did not shift his weight. He did not fidget. He stood the way very old trees stood, rooted, patient, not particularly concerned about anything around him, because nothing around him posed a genuine threat. He had dark hair, short but not close-cropped, and silver-gray eyes that were currently focused on her, with an expression she could not read. He was not sneering. He was not dismissive. He was simply looking at her in the way that a person looks at something they are genuinely trying to understand. He was also, she noticed with an uncomfortable awareness, much younger than she had somehow imagined. 26, she knew from the stories. But standing in front of her, he looked younger than that in his face, even if everything about his bearing suggested he had not been young in the way most people meant for a very long time. Behind him, 12 warriors in matching gray stood in 2 lines. To his left, Alpha Gregor was making his way forward from the gate, already sweating slightly, his smile too wide and too early. She realized she was staring. She dropped her gaze. "The crates," the Alpha King said. "Leave them. Someone else will move them." "I can manage," she said quietly. She did not know why she said it. It came out before she thought about it. A brief silence. "I said leave them." The repetition was not aggressive. It was simply the tone of someone who did not expect to say things more than twice. She stepped back from the cart, clasping her hands in front of her, and looked at the ground. That was when one of the iron-bound warriors moved, the one directly behind the king's right shoulder, a broad man with cropped blonde hair, and the kind of expression that had settled into permanent impatience. He stepped forward and shoved the nearest crate with his boot, hard, and it slid directly into Serafina's legs and knocked her sideways. She stumbled, caught herself on her hands against the cobblestones, and felt the sharp edge of the stone cut across her right palm. She did not cry out. She had learned not to make noise when things hurt, because making noise attracted the wrong kind of attention. She simply went still for a moment, hands on the ground, and breathed. Then she saw it. Her blood, where it welled up from the cut on her palm, was silver. Not the entire volume of it. It shifted within 2 heartbeats, darkening from that brief bright silver to red. But for those 2 seconds, it sat on her skin like liquid moonlight, clear, unmistakable. She pressed her palm flat to the ground immediately, covering it. When she looked up, the iron-bound warrior was already turning away, bored, finished with her. Gregor was several steps back, pretending he had not seen the shove. The other warriors were looking straight ahead, but the Alpha King was looking directly at her hand. Not at her face, not at the crates. At her hand, pressed flat against the cobblestones, hiding what she had just shown the empty air for 2 seconds. His expression had not changed. It was still that same unreadable stillness. But something behind his eyes had shifted. Some quality of attention had sharpened, in a way she could feel from 10 feet away, the way you feel a change in air pressure before the weather turns. Then he looked up at her face, and for one moment they were simply looking at each other. Her heart was going very fast. She kept her face neutral through years of practice. He looked away first. He turned and continued the procession into the main hall, as if nothing had happened. His warriors fell in behind him. Gregor hurried to catch up, already launching into the speech of welcome that he had clearly been rehearsing for a week. Serafina stayed where she was until the courtyard was empty. Then she looked down at her palm. The cut was already almost closed, faster than cuts usually closed on humans, faster than cuts closed on most wolves, though she had never said this to anyone. The blood was entirely red now, ordinary. She closed her fist around it and walked back toward the kitchen. She told herself it had happened too fast for him to have seen anything clearly. She told herself it had been dim in the courtyard, that the shadows from the wall were long in the afternoon light, that a man conducting an official territory review had 100 things to look at, and the palm of a wolfless kitchen girl was not going to be one of them. She almost believed herself. The banquet that evening was not her responsibility. The senior kitchen staff handled everything under the direct supervision of Gregor's mate, a thin and efficient woman named Clara, who ran the household with the precision of someone who understood that her own status depended entirely on her husband's performance tonight. Serafina spent the evening in the back rooms, doing inventory, counting sacks of grain and jars of preserved fruit, and recording the numbers in the household ledger, a task so routine that her hand moved almost without her attention. Her attention was elsewhere, on the courtyard, on her palm, on the way those silver-gray eyes had moved from her hand to her face with that specific quality of sharpened focus. She ate a small plate of food alone in the kitchen after the main dinner was done, listening to the distant sounds of the formal meal, voices, the occasional sound of something placed heavily on a table, Gregor's laugh, which was always louder than necessary when he was performing. She washed her plate. She put it away. She walked back to the small building she shared with 3 other low-rank girls, and went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed. Nora appeared in her doorway an hour later, still bright-eyed from whatever she had been able to watch of the evening's proceedings. He barely spoke, Nora reported, settling onto the floor with the ease of someone very comfortable with the floor. Just sat there, while Gregor talked, which honestly seemed like its own kind of judgment. Clara was magnificent, though. The food was excellent. "Good," Serafina said. "He has the most interesting eyes," Nora said. "They look like they belong to someone who remembers everything they have ever seen." "That sounds exhausting." Nora looked at her. "You seem odd." "I am always odd." "More odd than usual." Nora studied her for a moment, in the way that Nora did, openly, without pretending she was not looking. "Did something happen?" "The cart tipped in the side courtyard during the procession." Nora winced. "Oh no. I cleaned it up. It was fine." "Did he see?" "He saw the cart tipping. It does not matter." She said this firmly, leaving no room for the conversation to continue in that direction. Nora, who understood the shape of Serafina's firm sentences, let it drop. They talked about other things, until Nora grew sleepy and went to her own room. Serafina lay on her back in the dark and stared at the ceiling. She was so focused on the ceiling, and on the memory of those silver-gray eyes, that she did not hear the soft sound outside her window until it had already stopped. She went still. She listened. Nothing. The night forest was quiet. Then she heard something closer. A very deliberate, very quiet sound. Something sliding under her door. She was off the bed and across the room in 3 steps. She pressed her back against the wall beside the door and waited. No footsteps receding, no sound at all from the corridor. She waited another 30 seconds, then she opened the door. The corridor was empty in both directions. The compound outside was dark and still. There was not a trace of anyone. She looked down. On the floor just inside her doorway was a folded piece of paper. Thick paper, good quality, the kind used for official correspondence. She picked it up and unfolded it. 3 words, written in a firm and unhurried hand. No signature. No identifying mark. "Do not run." She read it twice. Then she read it a 3rd time, because she was the kind of person who wanted to be sure she had understood something correctly before deciding how to feel about it. The paper was warm to the touch. Not from her hands. She had picked it up only seconds ago. Warm as if it had been held. She stood in her doorway for a long time, the note in her hands, the dark corridor empty in front of her, and tried to think clearly about what this meant. Someone had come to her door, after the entire pack was asleep, and left a message that assumed she was considering running, which meant that someone believed she had reason to run, which meant that someone had seen something in that courtyard that gave her reason to run. She sat on the edge of her bed and held the note against her chest, and breathed slowly. "Do not run." It was not a command. At least, it did not feel like one. It felt almost like advice, like someone who knew more than she did about what was coming, was extending her a small courtesy before it arrived. She put the note carefully under her mattress and lay back down. She did not sleep for a long time. When she finally did, she dreamed of silver light moving through water, and of her father's hands, and of a feeling she had no name for. The feeling of standing at the top of a very tall mountain, looking out at an enormous landscape, and understanding, for the first time, that you had always been standing there, even when you could not see it. She woke before sunrise, pulled the note out from under the mattress, and read it one more time. She put it back. She got dressed. She went to start the morning fires. Her hands did not shake. She was somewhat proud of that. The morning routine of the Ashvale pack during the Alpha King's visit had a different quality to it. Tighter, more careful, as if the entire compound was holding its breath. Wolves who usually slept past sunrise were up before dawn. Warriors who usually trained with relaxed, familiar ease were drilling in careful formation in the main yard. Even the children were quieter than usual, sensing something in the adults around them, the way children always sense things without being told. Serafina moved through her morning tasks with the focused attention of someone determined not to be noticed. She heated water. She brought wood. She helped lay the breakfast things in the main hall before the formal morning meal, and then withdrew to the back kitchen as instructed, sitting at the wooden table with a cup of tea and the daily inventory list, working through numbers she did not actually need to count again. She was on her third cup of tea when the young warrior appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was perhaps 20, one of the Ironbound's junior attendants by the look of his gray uniform, and he had the slightly glazed expression of someone who had been given an instruction he did not fully understand, and was following it anyway. "Serafina Voss?" he asked. She set down her cup. "Yes. You are required in the East Guest Hall, now." She looked at him steadily. "Required by whom?" "By the Alpha King." The kitchen went very quiet. Two of the other kitchen girls had stopped what they were doing and were staring at her. She did not look at them. "All right," she said. She stood, set the inventory list down, and followed the young warrior out. The East Guest Hall was one of the compound's finest rooms, rarely used, kept for formal visitors, with wooden floors and tall narrow windows that let in long columns of morning light. It had been prepared for the king's personal use during the visit, the furniture rearranged to suit someone who apparently preferred to face the door from a position with the window at his back. He was already there when she arrived, seated at the head of the table, a cup of black tea in front of him that was, as far as she could tell, completely untouched. He was not alone. 6 of the Ironbound lined the walls, 3 on each side, standing with their hands clasped behind them. The young warrior who had brought her withdrew immediately, closing the door. Serafina stood in front of the door and looked at Kalen Duskmore. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The morning light came through the window behind him and caught the silver in his eyes, and she had the disorienting impression of looking at someone who was entirely present, not performing, not managing, simply occupying the moment with his full attention in a way that most people never did. "Sit down," he said. She crossed to the table and sat in the nearest chair, placing her hands flat on her knees. She did not fold them. Folded hands looked like nervousness. She kept them open. He looked at her for another moment. Then, "Your name?" "Serafina Voss." "Your rank in this pack?" She considered the question carefully. "I hold no formal rank." "Your function?" "Kitchen and maintenance work." "Your age?" 18. "How long have you been in Ashvale?" "All my life. My father was the beta here. He died when I was 6. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not sympathy, but a kind of registering. "Owen Voss," he said. She had not expected him to know that name. "Yes." He picked up his tea, looked at it, put it down again without drinking. "I am going to ask you something directly. I would prefer a direct answer." She waited. "What was that in the courtyard yesterday?" She held very still. "I do not know what you mean." "Your blood," he said, "when you cut your palm on the cobblestone." For approximately 2 seconds, before it changed, it was silver. She looked at him without blinking. "I do not know what you are referring to." The silence that followed was long enough to be uncomfortable. The ironbound along the walls had not moved. The room was completely quiet, except for the distant sounds of the compound outside. "I am not going to force anything," he said at last. His voice was level. No heat in it, no frustration. He was simply stating a fact. "I want you to understand that clearly. What I am going to do is tell you something, and then I am going to let you decide what to do with it." She did not answer. She listened. 9 years ago, he said, my mate became ill. The illness was unlike anything the healers had seen. It affected her wolf first, then her warmth, then her energy. The scholars called it the gray wasting. I spent 4 years searching for a cure. He paused. I found references, in texts that were very old, to something called silver blood, a lineage that predated the wolf bond. The records described their blood as possessing healing properties, unlike any natural medicine, capable of reaching things that no other remedy could touch. The records also said they were believed to be extinct. He stopped. Let that settle. Then, yesterday, in the side courtyard of this pack compound, I watched a girl's wound bleed silver for 2 seconds before she covered it with her hand. The room was absolutely still. Serafina said nothing. My mate, he continued, is dying. She may have 2 weeks without intervention. She has had no wolf for 8 months. She can barely leave her bed. He said this without self-pity, without manipulation. He was reporting a situation. I am not telling you this to pressure you. I am telling you so that you have complete information. She looked at her hands, flat on her knees. She thought about the note under her mattress. Do not run. She thought about her mother's face going ash pale in the lamplight, saying some things that are very old frighten people very badly. She thought about 18 years of keeping herself hidden and quiet, of being told she was nothing, of pressing her glowing hands against cold walls in the dark. What do you want from me? She asked. I want to know what you are, he said, and I want to ask if you are willing to help. She looked up at him. And if I say no? His expression did not change. Then I leave tomorrow morning, and you never see me again. She studied his face for a long time. She was looking for the lie in it, the calculation, the manipulation dressed up as honesty. She was quite good at reading people after years of needing to know who was going to make her day harder. She looked at him carefully. She did not find the lie. I am not saying yes, she said finally, but I am also not saying no. He nodded once, the gesture of someone accepting a reasonable boundary. Then I will be here tomorrow, he said, and the day after, and we will talk more, on your terms. She stood. She pushed her chair back evenly. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and said, without turning, You should drink your tea. It has been cold for 10 minutes. She heard, behind her, the smallest possible sound, not quite a sound actually, more like the absolute beginning of one, caught and stopped before it arrived. She walked out. The old scholar arrived on the second day. Serafina had not been warned. She had spent the morning doing her usual work, wood, water, inventory, the quiet rhythm that her days moved to, and was in the small herb garden beside the kitchen cutting rosemary, when Nora appeared at the gate with a message that the Alpha King was requesting her presence again in the East Guest Hall. She went without rushing. She told herself this was because she was not afraid. It was mostly true. The East Guest Hall had been rearranged again. The 6 iron-bound warriors were still present, but they had been moved further back, closer to the walls, creating more space in the center of the room. There was a second person at the table now, a man who was very old, 70 at least, with white hair that sat in a state of cheerful disorder on his head, and the kind of deeply lined face that came from decades of narrowing one's eyes at small text in poor light. He had several large books open in front of him, and was making notes in the margins with a pencil so short it had clearly survived years of use. When Serafina entered, the old man looked up and smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and curious, with no performance in it. Kalen was at the far end of the table, reviewing documents she could not see. He did not look up immediately. Serafina Voss, the old man said, as if he was confirming something, rather than introducing himself to it. I am Aldrich. She stopped. The scholar. He spread his hands. The same. She looked at him, really looked, and felt a slow recognition. This was the man who had been leaving her books for years. The same cheerful disorder. The same quality of attention that suggested he found almost everything genuinely interesting. You have been to Ashvale before, she said. Twice a year for the past 12 years, he said. You have very good taste in the books you choose from my pack. The one about lunar tides was a particularly good selection. I was pleased you took it. She had not known, those times, that she was being watched. She was not sure whether that felt like warmth or like exposure. She sat down across from him, because standing seemed wrong when he was sitting and looking at her with that open, comfortable expression. Kalen finally looked up. Aldrich has been my personal scholar for 20 years, he said. He is the person who found the original references to the silver-blooded lineage. He is also, as it appears, already familiar with you. In a distant way, Aldrich said pleasantly. I have been watching this girl since she was approximately 12 years old, when I noticed that the plants in the herb garden near where she worked were significantly larger and healthier than the ones in any other part of the compound. It is a subtle indicator. Most people would not notice. Serafina looked at the herb garden through the window and felt something very strange move through her. Not quite anger, not quite relief, something complicated. You knew, she said. You knew what I was, and you left me here. The smile on Aldrich's face softened into something more honest. I suspected what you might be. It is not the same thing. I could not be certain without more information, and approaching you directly, when I had only a suspicion, would have been irresponsible. Silverbloods have not existed openly in 200 years. The risks of being wrong, of drawing attention to you without cause, seemed greater than waiting. And if you had waited too long? That was a concern, he admitted. He said it without deflection. She appreciated that. She looked at Kaelin. Is he here to study me? He is here to tell you the truth about what you are, Kaelin said, which I believe you deserve to know regardless of any other decision you make. She considered this. It was, she thought, a careful way of doing things, offering her information as its own gift, separate from the asking. She noticed the care, and noted it without deciding yet whether to trust it. All right, she said. Tell me. Aldrich put down his pencil and folded his hands on top of his books. He had the manner of someone who had explained complex things to many different people, and had learned to find the right starting point by looking at who was in front of him. Everything you know about werewolf history, he began, starts with the wolf bond. The moment the first wolf spirit connected with a human bloodline and created the shifter race as we know it. That is how the history is taught, and it is accurate as far as it goes, but it does not go far enough back. He opened one of the books to a page he had marked with a strip of cloth. The page was dense with old text and diagrams that she could not quite read from her distance. Before the wolf bond, he continued, there were others. The first children of the moon goddess, created not through the animal bond but through direct lunar inheritance. They did not carry an animal spirit. They carried something older, pure lunar energy, living in their blood, constant, quiet, enormously powerful when it chose to manifest. He turned the book so she could see the page. The diagram showed a human figure with veins drawn in silver ink, the lines radiating outward from the chest like a second circulatory system running alongside the first. They were called silverbloods, he said. They predated the wolf packs entirely. They had no hierarchy, no alpha structure, no territorial organization. They simply existed. Healers, mostly. People who could touch something that was broken and feel where the break was, the way a skilled builder puts their hand to a wall and knows which stone is loose. Their healing was not learned. It was inherited. Serafina looked at the diagram. She thought about her hands on cold stone in the dark, and the warmth that moved through the rock, and the bird that had sat on her windowsill and waited. What happened to them? She asked. Aldrich's expression shifted. Not sad, exactly. Careful. The wolf hierarchy grew powerful, and power, as it organizes itself, tends to feel threatened by things it cannot organize. He paused. Silverbloods could not be ranked, could not be claimed by any alpha. They answered to no territorial law. They did not fit the structure, and things that do not fit the structure make structures nervous. They were hunted, she said. Hunted is a strong word. The historical record is careful about its language. But over a period of approximately 3 centuries, the silverblood population declined from something significant to something barely traceable. The last confirmed silverblood was recorded 240 years ago. After that, the lineage was considered extinct. He looked at her steadily. It was not. She sat with that for a moment. 240 years. Her blood carrying something that had survived that long, hidden in ordinary-looking people in ordinary-looking lives, waiting. My father, she said. Owen Voss suppressed his gift entirely, Aldrich said. The binding ritual he used was very old and very thorough. Without knowing what to look for, I could not have told him from any other wolf. He was extraordinarily careful. He died when I was 6, she said. The words came out flat, the way words came out when you had said them so many times they had worn smooth. Yes, Aldrich was quiet for a moment. He loved you enormously. I want you to know that what he hid from you was not hidden from cruelty. He was frightened for you. He understood what you would be, and he understood the world you were being born into, and he did not know how to protect both you and the truth at the same time. She looked at the table. She was not going to cry in this room, in front of these people. She breathed once, slow. He chose me, she said. He chose you, Aldrich agreed. Kaylin, across the table, had been entirely silent during this. She looked at him, and found him watching her, with that same quality of attention he had brought to the courtyard, to the interrogation room, to every moment so far, complete, unperforming, present. What can I do? She asked, not to Aldrich this time, to herself, out loud. She wanted to hear her own voice say it. We do not know the full extent of it, Aldrich said, answering anyway. The record suggests silverbloods had significant healing capacity, some connection to natural growth and living things, and a protective quality that expressed differently in different individuals. What we know about you specifically is limited to what you have experienced yourself. He looked at her with that warm, curious expression. So tell me, what have you experienced? She was quiet for a moment, then she told him. All of it. The glow in her veins on new moon nights, the warmth that moved through her palms, the plants leaning, the bird, the cuts that closed faster than they should. The fact that she had never been seriously ill in her life, not once, not even when everyone around her was suffering from the winter sickness 2 years ago, and she had nursed 3 of the other kitchen girls back to health, touching their feverish foreheads without thinking, and they had all been better within a day. She watched Aldrich's face as she talked. His expression went through several things: recognition, excitement, the scholarly pleasure of a theory confirmed, and settled finally on something that looked like reverence. The healing you did when nursing the others, he said. You touched them? Their foreheads. I was checking for fever. And they recovered in a day. I thought they were not as sick as they seemed. He and Kaylin exchanged a look she could not fully interpret. You healed them, Aldrich said. Without knowing you were doing it, the gift does not require conscious activation, it simply responds to need. She sat with that. 18 years of thinking she had nothing, and she had been quietly healing people through ordinary touch, without anyone, including herself, understanding what was happening. And the Queen, she said carefully. You believe I could heal her? Aldrich did not answer immediately. He was precise, she was learning. He did not make promises he was not sure of. We believe it is possible, he said at last. The gray wasting is a dark magic curse, not a natural illness. It is resistant to ordinary healing, because ordinary healing works with the body's own processes, and the curse has corrupted those processes. Silver blood healing works differently. It does not work with the body's processes. It works underneath them, at the level of the thing itself. Like pulling out the root instead of treating the symptoms, she said. Exactly like that. She nodded slowly. She looked at Kaylin again. You said I could say no, she reminded him. You can, he said. No hesitation. And you would accept that? I would accept it, he said. I would not be pleased. But yes. She almost respected him for the honesty of that. Not pretending it would not matter. Just confirming that her choice would be honored, even when it cost him something. I need time to think, she said. You have it, Kaylin said. Take whatever you need. She stood. She walked to the door. She stopped, and turned back, and looked at Aldrich. The books you left, she said. You chose them specifically. He tilted his head. I may have included a few titles that I thought would be interesting for a girl with your particular nature. The one about lunar cycles, the history of botanical healing, the old mythology collection. You were teaching me without telling me what you were teaching me for. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I was preparing, in case the time came. I hoped it would be useful, rather than alarming, to discover you already knew the framework. She considered him for a long moment. Then she said, It was useful. Thank you. She left the room and walked out into the cold morning air and stood in the herb garden. Her herb garden, she thought now, with the plants that grew better near her hands than anywhere else, and breathed in the smell of rosemary and cold earth. She thought about her father's silver ring. She had looked for it for years. She had always assumed it was simply lost. Now she wondered if it had been something he kept close because it carried a memory of what he truly was, a small piece of himself that he could carry without explaining. She pressed her palm against the cold dirt and felt the warmth move out of her fingers. A small green shoot beside her palm tilted gently in her direction. She was not nothing. She had never been nothing. The world had simply been looking at the wrong things. She said yes on the morning of the third day. She did not announce it dramatically. She appeared at the door of the East Guest Hall before the morning meeting had even been called, while Kaelin was reviewing the previous day's territorial maps, and Aldrich was eating breakfast over an open book, and she sat down in the chair across from the scholar and said, "I will come with you, on conditions." Aldrich put down his fork. Kaelin did not move from his maps, but she could see the small change in his posture, a settling, like something under tension had been very slightly eased. "Name them," Kaelin said. He was still looking at the maps. "My mother comes with me," she said. "She will not be left in this pack without my presence. She has no protection here, and never has." "Done," he said. "Aldrich continues to explain my situation to me, completely and honestly. No managed information. No telling me only what you think I need to know. Everything." Aldrich said, with evident sincerity, "That was always my intention." "I am not property of the crown," she said. She looked directly at the back of Kaelin's head. "Not a resource, not a weapon. If I am to live in the palace and participate in whatever this arrangement is, I need that stated clearly, in writing, in whatever official form means it cannot be undone." He turned then and looked at her. His expression was serious. Not offended, simply serious, the way a person looks when they are genuinely considering a thing rather than dismissing it. "I will have it drawn up today," he said. "And if I say at any point that I am done," she continued, "I am free to leave. With my mother. Without consequence to either of us." "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Then I will be ready to leave when you are," she said. She stood to go. She paused with one hand on the back of the chair. "The warrior who pushed me in the courtyard," she said. "I am not asking for any action against him. I want you to know that I noticed, and I am choosing not to make it a condition, because I am not the kind of person who uses leverage when I do not need to. But I noticed." A long silence. "So did I," Kaelin said. His behavior was addressed. She left the room and went to find her mother. Alara cried when told. Not the pale, frightened crying of 3 years ago in the lamplight, but a different kind. The kind that came with relief mixed into it, when something that has been held back for a long time is finally allowed to move. She held Serafina's hands and looked at her silver-lit veins in the morning light, and did not look afraid at all. She looked, Serafina thought, like someone setting down something very heavy that they had carried for a long time. They packed their small belongings together in the 2 hours before the procession left. Serafina took her books. She took her mother's good shawl and the box that held the small items her father had left behind. She did not go around the pack saying farewell, because there were very few people to say farewell to. She said goodbye to Nora, who hugged her hard and told her to write letters, and promised to eat properly and not work too hard, and to please tell her everything when she could. She stopped at the herb garden. She crouched beside the rosemary and pressed both hands into the earth for a moment, feeling the warmth move into the soil. "Grow well," she said quietly. Then she stood up and walked toward the gate. The ironbound were already in formation. The carts were loaded. Gregor stood to one side, looking as if he was trying to determine how he felt about losing his kitchen girl, and whether it was something he should be upset about. He landed somewhere between indifferent and relieved, which Serafina thought was probably the most honest response he had produced all week. Kaelin sat on his horse at the front of the procession. He did not look back as she took her place beside one of the smaller carts. He simply moved forward when everyone was ready, and the procession moved with him. She walked out through the gate of Ashvale without looking back. The morning was cold, and the trees were tall and very still, and the road ahead wound between the pines toward a world she did not know. Her mother walked beside her, her small bag on her shoulder, her chin up. In her hand, Serafina carried the last note that had been slid under her door. The original one. 3 words on good paper, still faintly warm as she remembered it. She did not need to read it again. She had it memorized. Do not run. She was not running. She was walking forward, eyes open, into whatever came next. It was a different thing entirely. The palace of Greymere sat at the edge of a high cliff, overlooking a river so wide, it looked like a sea from above. Seraphina saw it for the first time through the trees, as the procession crested the last ridge of the northern road, and she stopped walking for a moment without meaning to. It was not what she had expected. She had imagined something severe and imposing, all hard stone and narrow windows, the physical expression of the man who lived in it. Instead, the palace was built in layers, growing out of the cliff face, as if the stone itself had shaped it over centuries, with windows that caught the evening light and turned it copper and gold, and a wide outer courtyard, where trees had been allowed to grow inside the walls, their branches reaching over the parapets and casting moving shadows across the stone. It looked like a place where things lived, not just where authority was kept. Her mother, beside her, put her hand on Seraphina's arm and held it as they walked the final stretch through the gate. The staff received them, without fanfare. A woman named Gertrude, who managed the household and wore her responsibility with the ease of long practice, showed them to a pair of connected rooms on the third floor of the east wing, small but clean, with windows that faced the river, and good mattresses, and shelves that had been cleared, she said, for whatever they wished to put on them. It was the most consideration anyone outside of Nora had shown Seraphina in years. She stood in the center of her room and looked at it for a long time, touching nothing. That evening, Aldrich came to find her and brought 2 books and a pot of tea, and the manner of someone with no intention of rushing. "You are settled?" he asked. "Well enough," she said. She poured the tea, because he seemed to have brought it as much for himself as for her. "Good." He opened one of the books to a page that was full of the old detailed diagrams she had seen in the East Guest Hall. "I thought we might continue your education in a less formal setting. The conference table is impressive, but I have always done my best thinking at a smaller one." They talked for 3 hours. He told her things that unpacked 18 years of not knowing, with a thoroughness that was sometimes almost painful. Not because the information hurt, but because each new piece of it rewrote something she had assumed about herself. And each rewrite was a small shock, like stepping on a stair that was not where you expected it to be. She was not defective. She had never been defective. The wolf bond, Aldrich explained, was not the only legitimate form of supernatural inheritance. It was simply the dominant one in the world as it currently existed. Silver blood was not a lesser version of the wolf bond. It was a parallel one, an older one. Like a river that had been dammed by a newer, larger river, but had never stopped flowing. "The reason you never shifted," he said, "is not because something failed to develop in you. It is because there was nothing to develop in that direction. Your inheritance runs along a different path entirely." "Then why did the pack treat it as a failure?" she asked. She kept her voice level, but he heard what was underneath it. "Because the pack had a framework," he said. "And everything in the world, within that framework, was either a wolf, or something lesser than a wolf. You did not fit the framework. So the framework told itself that the problem was you." She looked at the diagram of the silver circulatory system. "And the healing," she said. "How does it work?" He described it as best he could, knowing that the description was only approximately accurate. "The silver energy in her blood," he said, "responded to living things. To need. When something living was damaged or ill, the part of her that was silver could recognize the damage, the way a finger could recognize the roughness of a surface, without the eyes needing to see it. It reached toward the damage, and worked not against it, but around it, finding the underlying pattern of health that still existed in the structure of the thing, and amplifying it, supporting it, until the pattern was strong enough to reassert itself over the damage. It does not force healing," he said. "It reminds. It shows the living thing what it originally was, and helps it return to that." She sat with that. A healer that worked by remembering. She thought she understood the feeling of that, actually. The moments when the warmth moved through her hands had always felt less like doing something, and more like recognizing something. "What about the gray wasting?" she asked. "You said it was not an illness. It was a curse." "Yes." His expression grew more careful. "A constructed dark magic curse is different from natural illness or injury. It has a will of its own, or the closest thing to will that an inanimate magical construct can have. It was designed to resist interference. It knows what healing looks like, and it pushes against it. So when I try to heal the queen, it will push against me. Yes. She looked at him directly. And what happens if it gets into me? He was quiet for a moment. She appreciated that he did not answer immediately. The dark magic would attempt to take root in your bloodstream, he said finally. If it did, your silver energy would fight it. If your silver energy was strong enough, it would expel it. If it was not, he stopped. If it was not, she said, then I would have what the queen has. That is the risk, yes, he said. She nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. I told you I would be honest. You did. She looked at the river through her window. The light was fading, the water going from copper to gray. I am not saying I will not do it. I am saying I needed to know the real shape of it. He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had been leaving books outside her door for years. That is a very silver-blood thing to say. She raised an eyebrow. How so? Silverbloods, in the old records, were always described as people who wanted the truth first, and then decided what to do with it. Not people who needed to be protected from truth for their own good, but people who received truth and integrated it and moved forward with full eyes. It was considered one of their defining characteristics. She thought about that, about a whole lineage of people who had moved through the world with full eyes, choosing carefully, not from fear but from understanding. She wanted very badly to have been born into that world, to have grown up knowing what she was, surrounded by others who shared it. She had not been. She had grown up in the margins of a world that did not have a category for her, but she was here now. The next morning, she was brought to meet the queen. The rooms she was taken to were in the south wing, which received the most afternoon light. Someone had arranged them carefully, the furniture organized to create pathways that required as little physical effort as possible to navigate, the windows angled so the light came in warmly, rather than directly, bowls of the flowers that held scent longest placed at intervals, so the air was alive with something clean and sweet. Someone had thought about what comfort looked like for a person too exhausted to seek it herself. Queen Isolde was sitting up in bed when Serafina entered. She was not what Serafina had prepared herself for. She was young, 23, Serafina knew, but she looked younger and older simultaneously, the way serious illness sometimes did to people. Her hair was dark blonde and thinner than it should have been, but her eyes were absolutely alert and clear, the kind of eyes that had stayed sharp even when the rest of her was failing. She looked at Serafina the way Serafina looked at things, directly, without pretense, measuring what was real. Serafina found she liked her immediately, and was not sure whether that made this better or worse. You are not what I imagined, Isolde said. What did you imagine? Serafina asked. Something more imposing. More obviously powerful. She tilted her head. You look like a very determined person who has been tired for a long time. That seems accurate. Isolde almost smiled. Come and sit. I want to speak with you honestly before we go any further. She crossed the room and sat in the chair beside the bed, and Isolde turned toward her and said, He did not ask me before he started looking for you. He never does. He sees a problem and he begins solving it, and he tells me afterward what he has already decided to do. I am not angry about that. I understand how he works. But I wanted you to know that your being here was not something I requested. Serafina looked at her steadily. Are you asking me to leave? No, Isolde said immediately. I want to live. I want my wolf back. I want to sit in the morning garden and feel the sun, and run through the forest at night, and right now, I cannot do any of those things. Her voice was even, but there was something fierce underneath it. What I am saying is that you are a person, not a cure. And if you agree to help me, I want it to be because you chose it, not because you were arranged into position. I have read the stories about the Alpha King, Serafina said, and I understood before I came here that he operates in a certain way. Then you have come in with clear eyes, Isolde said. I prefer clear eyes, Serafina said. Isolde looked at her for a long moment. Then she held out one pale hand, not asking for healing, just offering it as a gesture, the way a person offered a hand to someone they wished to recognize as equal. Serafina took it. The moment her fingers closed around Isolde's, she felt it, not with her eyes or her mind, but with that deeper part of her, the silver part that recognized living things. She felt the pattern of what Isolde was, and beneath it, dark and deliberate and deeply embedded, the shape of what was eating her. It was not random. It was not scattered the way natural illness scattered. It was concentrated and intentional, like a root system that had been planted to kill a tree from the inside out. She let go of Isolde's hand and sat back. Her own heartbeat was very loud in her ears. "Can you heal me?" Isolde asked. Serafina thought of Aldrich's words, what it would look like if the dark magic got into her. She thought of what 18 years of being told she was nothing had looked like. She thought of her father pressing silver into the ordinary shape of himself to keep her safe, and how she had spent every year since wishing he had stayed alive long enough to teach her something true. She thought, "I am not nothing. I have never been nothing." "Yes," she said. "I can heal you, but not today. I need to understand it better first. And when I do it, I want Aldrich present, and I want to do it on my own terms, in my own time." Isolde nodded. "Then we will wait until you are ready." "Thank you," Serafina said. She meant it in a way that was larger than the immediate exchange. Isolde seemed to understand that. She walked back through the south wing, and through the long corridor, and out into the palace courtyard, where the trees planted inside the walls were turning the afternoon light into a moving, dappled thing. She stood in the center of that light and breathed. She had a life here, a real one, with a room and a real bed, and her mother down the hall, and a purpose that was hers by nature rather than by assignment. She had been given something she had never had before. Not charity, not grudging tolerance. Space. Legitimate space. She lifted her hands and looked at her palms, and in the afternoon light, very faintly, she could see the silver beneath the skin. She was ready to stop hiding it. The days that followed had a different texture to them than any days she had known before. She worked, but differently, not hauling wood or scrubbing floors, but sitting with Aldrich every morning for 2 to 3 hours, working through the old texts he had spent years collecting, building a framework for understanding what she was. He was a patient teacher who never condescended and never simplified beyond what was actually simple. She asked a great many questions, and he answered each one with the thoroughness it deserved. In the afternoons, she spent time with her mother, who had settled into the palace with a quiet and practical ease that Serafina had not expected. Elara had found Gertrude, the household manager, and had offered to help with the sewing and mending that accumulated in any large household, and within 3 days, she had a corner of the household workroom that was officially hers, and a small but steady stream of work. She moved through the palace with the manner of someone who had simply decided to be useful, and the household staff, recognizing a useful person when they saw one, had absorbed her without question. Serafina told her mother what she was learning each day, piece by piece, and watched Elara receive each piece with something that looked increasingly like relief, as if the secret her husband had given her to keep, the enormous frightening secret she had carried for 12 years, was finally being allowed to become something ordinary, something discussable, something real. On the 4th evening, Elara said, "Your father used to hold things in his hands." Serafina looked up from her food. "What things?" "Small things. When we were first together and I did not know yet what he was. Leaves from the garden, stones from the path. He would hold them in his palm while he was thinking, absently, and they would be warm when he put them down. I thought he just had warm hands." She smiled at the memory, a small, private smile. "I did not understand until much later. By then I loved him so much that learning what he was felt less like a revelation and more like a confirmation. It simply explained something I had already known, in a different form." Serafina thought about the stones she herself had pressed her hands against in the dark, the warmth that moved through them. "He was not afraid of it," she said, "when he was with you." "He was never afraid of it with me," Elara said. "He was afraid of everyone else." She sat with that for a long time after dinner, walking alone in the courtyard, while the palace settled around her into nighttime sounds. The torches along the inner walls burned steadily. The river was audible in the distance, a constant low voice. She was not startled when Kalen appeared on the far side of the courtyard. She had heard him coming. He walked quietly but not silently, and she had been paying attention to the sounds around her more carefully since arriving at Greymere. He crossed toward her with the deliberate pace of someone who was not trying to sneak up on her, and stopped a reasonable distance away. "You are not sleeping," he said. It was not a question. "I think better when I walk," she said. He looked at the courtyard. "I have the same problem." She looked at him. He was without the formal coat he wore in official settings, in plainer clothes, and it made him look slightly less constructed, slightly more like a person who had learned to carry an enormous weight by distributing it carefully across every part of himself. "How is she today?" Serafina asked. "The same. The physician says the rate of decline has slowed slightly in the past few days, but he cannot account for why." She thought about the moment she had taken Isolde's hand, about the warmth that had moved from her palm into that brief contact. She had not done it consciously. It had simply happened, the way it always happened, the silver energy responding to need without being asked. "It may have been the contact," she said. "When I held her hand, it was not a full healing, but some small transfer may have happened without my intending it." He looked at her with that focused quality of attention. "You can do it without trying. Apparently, I have been told I healed 3 people in my pack over the years without knowing I was doing it. And that does not trouble you? The doing of things without full conscious control?" It was a more thoughtful question than she had expected. She considered it properly. "It troubles me less than I thought it would," she said, "because the thing it does without my asking is the thing I would choose to do if I were asking. It moves toward damage. It tries to help. I can work with an instinct that wants to heal." She paused. "I think I would be more troubled if the instinct moved in the other direction." He was quiet for a moment. "You are very calm about all of this," he said, "for someone whose entire understanding of herself has been changed in less than a week." "I have had 18 years of having very little," she said. "Finding out that the very little was actually a great deal is not a distressing revision." He looked at the trees along the wall, the ones growing inside the palace courtyard, their branches catching the torchlight. "The trees near your room," he said. "They are larger than the others." She looked at them. She had not noticed, but now that he said it, she could see it. The slight difference in the spread of branches, the slightly deeper green of leaves in the torchlight. "Apparently that is something I do," she said. "Make things grow. Make living things grow toward health, yes." She looked at him. "Does that trouble you?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "It is one of the least troubling things I have encountered this year." She almost asked what the most troubling things had been. She decided not tonight. "I will be ready to attempt the healing in 3 days," she told him. "I want 2 more sessions with Aldrich first. I want to understand what I am reaching into before I reach into it." He nodded. 3 days. He seemed to want to say something else. She waited. He did not say it. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She walked back toward the east wing, and her room, with the good mattress, and the window that faced the river. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and put her hand flat against the stone wall beside her, and felt the familiar warmth move out of her fingers. 3 days. She had 3 days to prepare for the most important thing she had ever done. She had not asked for any of this. She had not chosen to carry silver blood, or to be born into a world that did not have a place for her, or to grow up in a pack that taught her she was lesser than the least of its wolves. But she was here now, real and known, and about to step forward into something large. She pressed her palm flat against the stone and felt it warm beneath her hand. She was ready. On the morning of the 6th day at Greymere, something happened that Serafina had not prepared for. She woke to a sound she could not immediately identify, a thin, high sound, like a wire being pulled to its limit, and sat upright in her bed, with her heart already hammering, before her eyes were fully open. She pressed her hand to the wall beside her and felt it, before she understood what she was feeling, a tremor in the stone itself, distant and faint, the way the ground feels when something heavy is moving a long way off. She dressed fast. She went into the corridor and found 2 iron-bound warriors already moving toward the south wing at a run, not speaking, not looking back at her. She followed them without asking. The south wing corridor was bright with lamplight even though it was barely past dawn. 3 of the palace physicians were outside Isolde's door, and through the half-open door, Serafina could see a 4th person inside, bent over the bed with urgent hands. She did not go in. She stood in the corridor and pressed her back to the wall and focused. She could feel it. The same way she could feel when a plant was dying from the inside before the leaves showed it, a kind of deep wrongness that she had no more specific word for than that. The pattern of Isolde's health, which had been dim but present when she took her hand 3 days ago, was flickering. The dark structure of the curse that she had felt embedded in it was expanding, pressing outward, finding the room it had not yet filled. The curse was accelerating. Kaelin arrived in the corridor 2 minutes later. She heard him before she saw him. The different quality of the footsteps, that particular evenness, even under pressure. He did not run. He moved fast without running, which was its own kind of control. He came to stand beside her and looked at the door and then looked at her. "How bad?" he asked. Just those 2 words, quiet and direct. "She is losing ground faster than before," Serafina said. "Something changed overnight." Aldrich believes the curse may have sensed resistance. Kaelin's voice was entirely steady. He says dark magic constructs sometimes respond to proximity to Silverblood by accelerating, an attempt to achieve their objective before interference arrives. She looked at him. "Then I need to go in now. Not in 3 more days, now." "You said you needed 3 days. That was before the curse changed its pace." She pushed off the wall. "I need Aldrich, and I need the room cleared of everyone except him and you." He did not argue. He did not ask if she was sure. He turned and gave the instructions, and the corridor emptied with the kind of efficiency that came from people who were very well trained and very used to following a man who did not repeat himself. Aldrich appeared from around the corner. He had apparently already been awake, his white hair even more disordered than usual, carrying a small leather case that she had not seen before. He took one look at her face and said, "You felt it then?" "Yes. Come." She went into the room. Isolde was propped against pillows, and the change since 3 days ago was visible and immediate. Her color was gone, not pale, but actually gray, the particular gray that had given the wasting its name. Her hands on the blanket were trembling, but her eyes were still open, still clear, still alert, and they found Serafina immediately when she came through the door. "You came early," Isolde said. "Something changed during the night," Serafina said, coming to sit on the edge of the bed. "You felt it?" "I felt her wolf go quieter," Isolde said. "She has been very quiet for months, but last night it was like—" She stopped, like a candle that had been barely burning, going almost out, just a thread of light left. Serafina placed her hand over Isolde's and felt the thread. It was very thin, but it was there. "I am going to try to do this now," she told Isolde directly. "I cannot promise what it will feel like, and I cannot promise I will be successful. What I can promise is that I will not stop until either it is done or I have no more to give." Isolde looked at her steadily. "I know." "Are you afraid?" Serafina asked. "Yes," Isolde said, "but I am also furious. I have been sick for 8 months, and I am completely done with it." Despite everything, Serafina almost smiled. "Good. Hold on to that." She looked at Aldrich, who had moved to stand near the window with his case open on the sill. She could see small tools inside, things she did not fully recognize, but she trusted that he knew his role in this. She looked at Kaelin, standing by the door, utterly still, his hands at his sides. She looked back at Isolde and took both of her hands. She did not close her eyes. She had tried that in practice sessions with Aldrich, and found that she worked better with her eyes open. Something about the physical reality of the world around her helped anchor her when the silver energy began to move outward. She breathed. She let the familiar warmth build in her chest. Not forced, never forced. Simply allowed, like water that had been held behind a dam finally given permission to move. She felt it travel through her arms and into her hands, and she felt the moment it made contact with Isolde's damaged pattern, because it was like pressing her palm against something very hot and very cold at the same time. A shock of meeting. The curse felt her immediately. That was the only way she could describe it. It had no mind. It had no awareness in the way that people were aware. But it had been designed to resist, and it recognized the presence of something that could resist it back, and it responded. She felt it contract inward, and then push outward with sudden concentrated force, and the warmth in her arms met that push and held. She held. It was not pleasant. It was not the gentle warmth she had felt pressing her hands against stones in the dark. This was effort, real, deep physical effort, like bracing against a door while something very strong pushed from the other side. She could feel the dark structure of the curse probing for weakness in her, testing, searching, trying to find the place where her energy was thinnest. She focused on Isolde's pattern instead, on the dim, flickering shape of what Isolde was, the wolf that was barely breathing, the warmth that had almost gone cold, the life that was still stubbornly present, even after 8 months of being eaten at. She focused on that, and she remembered it. Not her own memory, but a deeper remembering, the kind Aldrich had described, showing a thing what it had been before the damage arrived. Isolde drew in a sharp breath. The candle thread that Serafina had felt when she walked in brightened. Not much, but enough. Like a flame that had nearly gone out, catching slightly when you cupped your hand around it. The curse pushed harder. She felt it in her arms first, a creeping cold, moving up from her hands toward her elbows. It was feeling for a way in. She tightened everything she had, focused harder, poured more of the warmth outward, and felt the cold stop. Not recede. Stop. Just pause. She thought, I know what you are. You were built deliberately, to end something that should not be ending. You are not natural. You do not belong in this body. I know what belongs here, and it is not you. She felt Aldrich's hand on her shoulder, not intervening, just present, a small point of contact. The curse contracted. She felt it happen, a pulling back, not a defeat, but a retreat to its densest core, as if it had decided that a full assault was not working, and was condensing itself instead, making itself smaller and harder to find. She followed it. She went deeper than she had meant to. Deeper than was comfortable. She followed the contracting dark pattern down into the deepest level of Isolde's bloodstream, chasing the root of it, and there, she found it. A knot. A precise, constructed knot of dark energy, tied in a way that required deliberate skill. This was not something that had entered Isolde's body naturally. It had been placed there, with intention, with specific knowledge of how to position it for maximum effect and minimum detection. This was not a curse that had found its host accidentally. This had been aimed. The shock of that understanding moved through her, and the curse used that 1 second of disruption to strike. The cold hit her full force, up both arms simultaneously, and she felt it reach for her chest. Her own silver energy responded on pure instinct, flaring outward, hot and sudden, the way a torch flares when it catches wind. The cold met the heat, and the two pushed against each other, and for a moment, she could not tell which was stronger. She heard someone say her name, not loudly, once, very controlled, from the direction of the door. She held. The cold receded. She gripped the root of the curse, and she pulled. It was not a gentle motion. It was not graceful. She pulled the way you pulled a stake from frozen ground, with everything she had, leaning back with her whole weight, feeling the resistance, and refusing to care about it. She felt the root crack, and crack again, and then tear free. And then it was gone. She sat there, still holding Isolde's hands, and the room was very quiet. Then Isolde made a sound she had probably not made in 8 months. A low, wondering sound, like someone seeing a color they had forgotten existed. She sat up straighter. Her color changed, not immediately to full health, not dramatically, not all at once, but like the early light of a morning coming in, gradual and real and entirely present. She's back, Isolde whispered. She was talking about her wolf. Serafina let go of her hands and sat back, and found that her arms were shaking. Not from fear, from effort. Every muscle from her fingers to her shoulders ached, the way muscles ached after genuinely hard physical work. She heard Aldrich exhale behind her, a long, slow, controlled exhale. She heard nothing from the direction of the door. She turned her head and looked at Kalen. He was standing exactly where he had been, hands still at his sides, but the stillness had a different quality to it now. She was not sure she had ever seen him look like that before, as though something inside him that had been wound very tight for a very long time had been very carefully, quietly let go. She needs to rest, Serafina said to him. Her own voice came out steadier than she had expected. He nodded. She stood, her legs held. She crossed to the window and stood there with her hands flat on the sill, looking out at the morning, feeling the cold stone under her palms, and the warmth moving slowly back into her fingers, and she breathed, and breathed, and breathed. She had done something real today. She had walked into something difficult, alone, with her eyes open, and she had come out the other side. She thought about 18 years of carrying this without knowing what it was, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt proud. They did not let Serafina sleep until that afternoon. The morning after the first healing was a complicated one, full of people with urgent questions and careful observations, and the particular energy of a situation that had shifted in ways no one had fully processed yet. Aldrich documented everything with thorough and methodical attention. The palace physicians examined both Isolde and Serafina in turn, though what they could examine in Serafina was somewhat limited by the nature of what she was. Isolde sat up in bed for the first time in 2 weeks without feeling dizzy, which she reported with great satisfaction. Serafina sat in the chair beside the bed and ate 2 plates of food that a kitchen girl brought without her asking, and drank 3 cups of tea, and confirmed to Aldrich's careful questions that yes, the cold had reached her arms, and no, it had not gotten further than that, and yes, she was entirely certain. She did not tell him how close it had been, not because she was hiding it, but because she was still working out in her own mind what it had felt like. That moment, when the curse had struck with full force, and she had not known for a handful of seconds which way it would resolve. She wanted to sit with that before she described it. What she had understood in that moment, in the midst of the effort, while the dark energy was actively pressing against her, and her own silver nature was pressing back, was something she had not expected to understand. She had not been afraid. She had been utterly focused, yes. She had been aware of what was at stake, both for Isolde and for herself. She had known, in the clearest possible way, that she might lose. But underneath all of that, something in her had been entirely steady. Not fearless in the way that meant not understanding the danger, fearless in the way that meant understanding it completely, and having chosen to be there anyway. She thought, maybe this is what it means to be what I am. Not invincible, not without risk, but built for this particular kind of fight, in a way that meant the fight could not hollow her out. She could lose, but she could not be diminished by trying. That was a new thought. She turned it over through the morning, quietly, while Aldrich wrote his notes, and Isolde dozed, and the palace moved around her. Kalen came to the room mid-morning and asked to speak with her in the corridor. She followed him out, and they stood by the tall window at the end of the hall, the river visible below in the morning light. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired," she said. "My arms ache. Otherwise well." Aldrich says the dark magic made contact. Briefly, it did not take root. He looked at the river. His profile, she had noticed, was where the things he chose not to put in his face sometimes appeared. A tension along the jaw, a slight working of a muscle that suggested something moving behind the composed surface. He also says you went further than the plan. "The plan was made when I thought I had 3 more days to prepare," she said. "The situation changed. I adapted." He turned and looked at her then. "You could have been seriously hurt." "Yes," she said. "So could she. If I had waited. I made a judgment." He looked at her for a moment. She held the look without shifting. "You are not going to apologize for it," he said. It was not a question. "No," she said. "It was the right decision." He turned back to the river. Another pause. Then, "Thank you." He said it quietly, without performance, the way he said most things. "She has been ill for 8 months. I have watched something happening that I could not stop. For 8 months. Whatever happens next, you did something this morning that I could not do." She looked at the side of his face. The jaw muscle had stopped working. Whatever was behind the composed surface had settled slightly, the way ground settles after a long rain. She said, "It is not finished. The healing today was real, but it was partial. The root came out, but the damage it did to her wolf and her overall health will take time to repair on its own. She needs rest and care, and probably another session in 2 or 3 weeks, when I have more energy, and we can address the remaining effects." "I know," he said. "Aldrich told me. I am not saying it to discourage you. I am saying it so you have accurate information." He looked at her. The silver-gray eyes with all that focused attention behind them. "You always want the information to be accurate." "It seems like the only useful approach," she said. Something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not a smile. He did not quite go that far. But the smallest movement in the direction of one. "You should rest this afternoon," he said. "I was planning to," she said. She pushed off the wall. She looked at him once more before she left. "Drink your tea before it goes cold," she said. He looked startled. Then, and she was almost entirely sure of this, though she did not slow down to confirm it, She heard the smallest sound of something that might, in a different man, have been a quiet laugh. She walked back to the east wing and fell asleep the moment she lay down, and slept without dreaming for 4 hours. When she woke, the afternoon light was long and amber in her room, and there was a tray of food on her table that had not been there when she fell asleep, covered with a cloth to keep it warm. Next to the tray was a single small plant in a clay pot. She recognized the type immediately: rosemary. The good kind, the kind that grew well in northern soil. There was no note. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the rosemary for a while, and then she reached out and touched one of the stems, and felt the familiar warmth move from her fingers into it. She was not sure what to make of the man who had sent no note. She was not sure she needed to make anything of it yet. What she knew was that she was somewhere new, doing something real, with her mother safe down the hall, and a purpose that was genuinely her own. The world outside this palace was full of things she did not yet know, people who feared what she was, politics she had not learned, dangers she had not mapped. There was still so much ahead that was complicated and uncertain. But today, this afternoon, in this room with the amber light and the rosemary on the table, she was simply here. Alive and present, and herself. That was enough to begin with. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 4 weeks after Serafina had come to Greymere. It was delivered with the morning correspondence, and set among the other official papers on the hall desk, looking ordinary and unremarkable in its thick gray envelope. The iron-bound officer who sorted the correspondence noticed the seal, not the official wax seal of any recognized pack or council, and took it directly to Kaelin. Serafina did not learn about the letter until later that day. She was in the East workroom with Aldrich, going through the secondary texts that described the long-term effects of silver blood healing on the healer, when Kaelin appeared in the doorway. He did not often come to find her in the middle of a working session. She looked at his face, and knew before he spoke that something had changed. "There is something you need to know," he said. He came into the room and placed the letter on the table between them. She did not pick it up immediately. She read it where it lay. The letter was from an organization that called itself the Lunar Purity Council. The language was formal and official, in the way that sometimes meant power, and sometimes meant people who had decided to dress up fear in formal clothing. It stated, with careful and deliberate phrasing, that word had reached the Council of the Alpha King's decision to house and protect a silver-blooded individual at the Palace of Greymere. It stated that the silver-blooded were considered, by ancient doctrine, to be a disruption to the proper order of the wolf hierarchy, entities whose existence placed the structure of pack life in question. It stated that the council formally requested the Alpha King reconsider his position and surrender the individual in question to the council's authority for evaluation and appropriate handling. The last sentence said, if this request was not honored within 30 days, the council would consider alternative means of resolution. Serafina finished reading. She picked the letter up, read it again, put it down. Alternative means of resolution, she said. Yes, Kaelin said. Who are they? Aldrich, who had been reading over her shoulder, sat back down, with the expression of someone working through several things simultaneously. The Lunar Purity Council has existed in some form for over a century. They have operated mostly as a philosophical organization, a group of traditionalists who believe the wolf hierarchy as it exists represents the proper and complete order of things, and that anything outside that order is, at best, an aberration to be contained. They have had limited political influence. Until now, Serafina said. They have been gaining membership over the past several years, Aldrich said. As my research into silver blood became less private than I intended, word appears to have spread through certain channels. Finding a living silver blood, has apparently given them something to organize around. She looked at Kaelin. You are going to tell me this changes things. It changes some things, he said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, something she had not seen him do in a working room before. He usually stood. It does not change the protections I have already put in writing for you. Those are not contingent on external pressure. She studied him. What does it change? It changes the speed of certain decisions, he said. I had intended to formalize your position gradually, allowing you time to settle before introducing the political dimension. The letter accelerates that. If you are to be protected, that protection needs to be visible and official and established before 30 days from now. And if the council does not accept the official position, then we deal with what follows, he said. She folded her hands on the table and thought. She thought about the way the pack elders in Ashvale had sometimes watched her, the barely concealed discomfort of people who did not have a category for something, and found that discomforting more than they found it interesting. She thought about the scale of that same discomfort, multiplied by organized intent and historical grievance. She thought about being afraid. She was, she decided, somewhat afraid. That was honest, and she was going to acknowledge it honestly, rather than dress it up as something more manageable. Someone had found out she existed, and had decided she was a problem that needed resolution. That was a specific and real danger. She was also angry. That was also honest, and she was also going to acknowledge it. She had spent 18 years being told she was lesser because she did not fit a category. She had spent 18 years quiet and careful and diminished. She had come here, into this place, and had been given real space for the first time. The idea that a group of organized traditionalists who had never met her were deciding what her existence meant was not something she was going to accept quietly. What does the formal position look like? She asked Kalen. He had clearly been prepared for this question. The title I have proposed is Silver Envoy, the first of that title to be created. It carries official palace status, legal protections written into royal charter, and recognition under pack law as a protected and independent designation. You would not be subject to any pack hierarchy. You would operate under crown protection, which means under my authority, but separately from pack structure. The ancient laws that covered silverbloods before their near extinction would be reinstated and formalized. Reinstated, she said. So these laws existed before. They did. They were quietly removed from active law during the period when the silverblood population was declining, on the grounds that maintaining laws for a group that no longer existed served no practical purpose. He said this evenly, without apparent editorial judgment, but she heard the shape of what he was describing. The laws were removed while the population was being reduced, she said. A brief silence. Yes, he said. She stood and walked to the window. Below, in the courtyard, 2 iron-bound warriors were sparring in the afternoon light, moving through a careful and practiced sequence. She watched them for a moment. If I take the title, she said, and the letter's deadline passes without compliance, and this council pursues alternative resolution, what does that actually mean? In practical terms. He was quiet for a moment. She appreciated that he thought before answering. In practical terms, it could mean an attempt to breach palace security. It could mean political maneuvering through the council structure, pressure on member packs to challenge my authority for harboring you. It could mean direct action against you specifically if you leave the palace grounds. He paused. I will tell you honestly that I do not know exactly what it will look like. What I know is that I have been dealing with organized threats to this territory for 9 years, and I have not lost one yet. She turned from the window. I notice you did not say you could guarantee my safety. I am not going to guarantee something I cannot control. She nodded slowly. That was the thing about him that she kept returning to. The refusal to offer comfort that was not grounded in truth. It should have been alarming, probably. Instead, it was one of the most trustworthy things she had encountered. I want 3 things before I formally agree to the title, she said. Name them. I want to see the full charter document before it is filed, not after. I want to review the exact language of the reinstated silverblood laws, because whoever originally wrote them may not have written them in a spirit I find acceptable. And I want to respond to the Lunar Purity Council myself. He looked at her. Respond how? In writing, she said. My own words, not palace correspondence. I want them to hear from me directly. Not about the political situation, about what I am, about what silverblood actually is, based on the true history, rather than the historical revision they have been working with. She met his eyes. They fear something they do not understand. I am not naive enough to think a letter will change their minds, but I want them to have received accurate information from the source. Whatever they choose to do with it after that is their responsibility. That is not how it is usually done, he said. I know, she said. I am not usually a person with a title. I am just now becoming one. I would like to begin as I mean to continue. Another silence. He said, All right. She turned back to the window. In the courtyard, the sparring had stopped. One of the warriors was offering his hand to the other, helping him up from where he had landed. The kind of gesture that happened between people who trained together long enough to trust each other. "One more thing," she said without turning. "Yes? When you read the letter this morning," she said, "what was your first reaction, before the practical assessment of it?" A long pause. She was not sure he would answer. "I was angry," he said, at last. "Not at the letter, at the world that produced it." He stopped. Then, more quietly, "At every version of that world that produced every version of that letter, for every person like you, for longer than either of us has been alive." She did not turn around. She looked at the courtyard. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "You asked for the truth," he said. "I always ask for the truth," she said. She heard him leave the room, the quiet, deliberate footsteps, the soft close of the door. She stayed at the window for a while longer. Outside, the afternoon was fading toward evening, the light going from gold to soft gray. The trees along the inner wall were very still. She put her hand against the glass and felt the warmth in her palm. She was not going to be manageable about this. She was not going to make herself small and cooperative and grateful for whatever space was offered. She was going to read the charter. She was going to review the laws. She was going to write her own letter. She was, at 18 years old, still new to being someone who had standing to do any of those things. It was a strange feeling, not quite comfortable, not quite familiar yet. She thought she could get used to it. The charter document arrived on her desk the following morning. She spent the entire day reading it, not skimming, not accepting the summary she could have asked Aldrich to provide, reading, line by line, with the kind of deliberate attention she had applied to every book that had ever been placed in front of her. She had 2 cups of tea that went cold, and did not notice. By midday she had a list of 7 specific points she wanted to discuss, written in her clean, slightly formal handwriting, in the margin of a separate sheet of paper. She brought the list to Kalen that evening. He was in his study, the first time she had been in this particular room, which was smaller than she had expected, and significantly less formal, with the evidence of real working use. Stacked papers, a map on the wall with marks she could not read from where she stood, 2 empty cups that had been cold for some time. He looked up when she entered without knocking, which he had told her through Gertrude she was permitted to do. She put the list on his desk. He read it. She watched him read it, the eyes moving carefully across each point, not rushing, not skimming. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "Point 4, he said. "The language in Section 7 of the Charter describes Silverbloods as entities under Crown protection," she said. "An entity is a thing. I want person. That is not a small difference." "Agreed," he said, without pause. "Point 6, she said. "The reinstated laws include a clause that says the Silver Envoy's powers may be called upon in service to the Crown, at the Crown's discretion. I want that removed and replaced with language that specifies the arrangement is voluntary and mutually agreed upon." He looked at her for a moment. "That clause was included by the legal counsel." "I know. I want it removed." A brief silence. "It will require reworking the surrounding sections." "Then they will need to be reworked," she said. He looked at her steadily. Then he picked up a pen and drew a line through point 6 on her list, and wrote something beside it. "Done," he said. "The others?" They went through all 7 points. He agreed to 4 without any discussion. He pushed back on 2, with specific reasons, and on those 2, she listened to his reasoning, and in one case, accepted it, and in the other, maintained her position, and he accepted hers. The 7th point was a detail about the legal definition of what constituted a violation of her protections, and they worked out a specific and clear phrasing together in the room. Him writing and her dictating and both of them reading it back until it said exactly what they meant. It took 2 hours. When it was done, she sat back and looked at the revised list, and at the notes around it, and felt something she had not expected to feel in this context. Satisfaction. Clean, earned, specific satisfaction. The satisfaction of a thing done carefully and right. He was looking at the same sheet, then he looked at her. "You were not educated formally," he said, not a question. "No," she said. "I read what I could find." "Then the books Aldrich left were useful." "Very. But I think I would have found this anyway." She looked at the document. I grew up watching what happened when language was imprecise, when someone said one thing and meant another, and there was no written record to appeal to. I learned to pay attention to words. He said, after a moment, I wish I had had advisors who read documents this carefully. She looked at him. You have Aldrich. Aldrich reads for content, you read for intent. He paused. Those are different skills. She considered that. I suppose I have been trying to understand what people intend since I was very young. It is a useful thing to learn when you are the person who does not receive the benefit of the doubt. He was quiet for a moment. She was used to his silences by now, the quality of them. This one had a specific weight to it, the weight of something being reconsidered. When you arrived here, he said, I told myself I was giving you information and letting you choose freely. I believed that. You did give me information, she said. I also brought you into a situation that had very high stakes for me personally, he said. I tried to be honest about that, but the truth is that when someone needs something from you very badly, the space for your choice is never quite as open as it looks. She looked at him for a long time. You are right about that, she said. The space was not entirely open, but I am a very good judge of what is available to me, and I made the best decision with what I had. I do not regret it. Even with the Lunar Purity Council letter? Even then, she folded her hands on the table. I have been in danger in one way or another since the day I was born, because I was something that did not fit where I was placed. The shape of the danger here is different, but I have more now than I have ever had. I can work with what I have. He looked at the window. The night was fully dark outside, the river invisible, only the torches along the wall reflecting in the glass. Your letter to the council, he said, when you said you wanted to write it yourself, in your own words, what did you want to say? She had thought about this. She had been turning it over for a day. I want to tell them what silver blood actually is, she said. Not as a political position, not as an argument, just the truth, as best as I understand it now. What it means, where it came from, what it has looked like in the lives of the people who carried it. She paused. I also want to tell them that I am a person, not an entity, not an aberration. A person who has been alive for 18 years, who has worked and read and thought and cared for people. I want to put that in writing somewhere, so that whatever they choose to do next, it is on record that they made their choice knowing that. He said nothing for a while. She had noticed that when he was processing something that mattered to him, he went quieter than his usual quiet. Will you let me read it when you have written it? He asked. Yes, she said, but I will send it as written, unless there is a factual error. I know, he said. I want to read it, not to approve it. She nodded. She stood, gathering the document from his desk, and he stood as well, in the slightly automatic way of someone whose formal training ran deep, even in informal moments. The legal counsel will have the revised charter ready in 3 days, he said. I will review it again when they do, she said. Something moved through his expression, quickly, but she was watching carefully. She thought it might have been, of all things, something close to amusement. I assumed you would, he said. She walked to the door, stopped. The map on your wall, she said without turning. The marks on it, are those territories with known Lunar Purity Council membership? A pause. Yes. She turned and looked at the map from the doorway. She was not close enough to read the specific marks, but she could see the pattern of them, more concentrated in certain regions, spread thinner in others, with one cluster very close to Greymere's territory. I would like to understand that map better, she said, when there is time. There will be time, he said. She walked out and down the long corridor toward the east wing, carrying the charter and her notes, and when she got to her room, she sat at her small desk and took out a clean sheet of paper. She sat there for several minutes, thinking. Then she began to write the letter. She wrote for 2 hours. She did not rush. She wrote about the history of silver blood, the real history, not the revised version. She wrote about her father, and what she understood now of the choice he had made. She wrote about 18 years of carrying a gift without knowing it was a gift, in a world that had no place for her. She wrote about what healing felt like from the inside, about plants leaning toward warm hands, about the bird that had sat on a windowsill in the dark and waited. She wrote about the queen, about the curse she had found embedded with deliberate skill, about what it felt like to pull it out by the root. She wrote, "I am not asking for your approval. I am not making an argument. I am simply telling you the truth about what I am, because you have formed a position about me without it, and I think you deserve accurate information, even if you choose to do nothing with it. What you do next is your decision. I will continue to exist regardless." She signed it with her full name, Serafina Voss. Not a title, not a designation, just her name. 3 weeks after the letter was sent, the Lunar Purity Council made its first move. It was not the move anyone had prepared for. Serafina had expected something aggressive. An attempt on the palace, some show of organized force. She had been watching the map in Kalen's study, learning the territory markings, building a picture in her mind of where the strength of the council was concentrated, and what directions a threat might come from. She had been working with Aldrich on understanding her own protective instincts, whether the silver energy could act defensively, as well as it could act in healing, and she had felt the quiet alertness of the iron-bound sharpening around the palace like a drawn string. What arrived instead was a piece of paper, filed through the official Council of Pack Elders, the advisory body that technically connected all the packs in the territory to the crown. It was a formal challenge of jurisdiction. The Lunar Purity Council was arguing, through their legal representative, that Serafina could not legally be classified as the Silver Envoy because the title had not existed in living law for over 200 years. That no individual who was not of recognized wolf bloodline could hold an official palace position, and that her presence at Greymere therefore violated the existing framework of pack law. It was a legal attack, not a physical one, designed to be addressed through procedure and argument and time, which were all things that the council had, and that Serafina, being new to all of this, might be assumed to lack. Kalen read the challenge at the breakfast table, which was where official correspondence reached him when he chose not to make himself available in the formal office. Serafina was also at the table. She had begun taking morning meals with him and Aldrich over the past 2 weeks, more from practicality than any deliberate social choice, since the three of them were usually the first people working in the morning and had fallen into the habit of working through the first hour over food. He passed the document to her without comment. She read it while finishing her tea. "They hired someone good," she said, when she was done. Kalen looked at her. "The argument is constructed carefully," she said. "Most of it is wrong, but it is wrong in ways that require specific rebuttals, not just general dismissal. That takes skill." She set the document down. "Who is their legal representative?" He told her. The name meant nothing to her yet, but she filed it. "We need 3 things to respond to this," she said. "First, the full historical precedent for the silver blood legal status. Aldrich has the source texts. We need them organized by date and by the specific points they address. Second, the argument that the legal framework they are citing was itself constructed after the period of silver blood persecution, and therefore reflects revised law rather than foundational law. Third, a counter-argument on the jurisdiction question that does not rely on the Crown's authority alone, because they will argue the Crown is biased." Aldrich had stopped eating. He was looking at her with that expression she had learned to recognize as his best scholarly attention, the one that meant something was being said that he found genuinely useful. Kalen said, "You have been thinking about this." "I have been thinking about several things," she said. "The map in your study shows council membership concentrated most heavily in the 3 packs closest to the northern border. The challenge was filed through the Council of Pack Elders, which means they have at least one sympathetic voice in that body. Who is it?" Another pause. He looked at her differently than he had in the East Guest Hall 5 weeks ago. She had noticed this happening gradually, the nature of his attention shifting from observation to something more like consultation. "Elder Crane," he said. "He represents the northern cluster." She nodded. "And the packs that are not members of the council, the majority, presumably. What are their positions likely to be on the question of my status?" "Mixed," Kalen said. "Most packs are indifferent to the question of silver blood specifically, because they have no living memory of them. What they are not indifferent to is precedent. If an external council can challenge Crown decisions through the elder body, they are watching to see how this is resolved. So the packs that are not part of the Lunar Purity Council are also watching," she said. "Which means the response to this challenge is also an opportunity. If we respond well, specifically, if the response establishes the silver blood status clearly, with full historical backing, and wins on those grounds, then every pack watching understands that the Crown operates by principle and precedent, not by fiat. Kalen was quiet for a moment. That is a more complete reading of the situation than my legal counsel produced this morning, he said. Your legal counsel did not read 18 years of nothing and arrive at the conclusion that words matter enormously, she said. She picked up the challenge document again. Give me 2 days with the source texts. I will produce the counter-argument structure. Your counsel can formalize the language. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. She spent the next 2 days in the library with Aldrich and with every primary source he had, working backward through the history she was still actively learning. She was not a trained scholar. What she had was the ability to read very carefully, and the instinct for the weak point in an argument that came from spending 18 years having arguments made against her existence that she could not openly refute. She found the foundation she needed in a text dated 300 years ago, a founding document of the original Pack Council that predated the wolf hierarchy by 60 years, and that named Silverbloods explicitly as a protected and independent lineage whose status was not subject to hierarchical authority because they predated the hierarchy itself. The Lunar Purity Council's challenge rested on the assumption that Pack Law was the foundational law, but Pack Law itself, at its origin, acknowledged something older. She wrote the argument structure in 12 careful pages and presented it to Kalen and the legal counsel together. The counsel, a man named Bertram who was thorough but somewhat slow to accommodate new information, took 40 minutes to work through it and came out the other side with a look that she could only describe as impressed and slightly irritated. Where did you find the founding document? He asked. Aldrich's archive, she said. 3rd shelf from the left. Blue cover. No title on the spine. Bertram made a note. The formal response was filed within a week. But the week between the filing and the council's response was not a quiet one. It was during that week that Isolde's health took its next step forward, which Serafina had been watching for. The deep healing from the first session had given Isolde's body the foundation it needed, and the wolf had been slowly, steadily, reasserting itself in the weeks since. But the body after a long illness did not simply spring back to full strength. It needed tending. It needed the slow, careful work of returning. Serafina visited Isolde every other day, never with a formal healing in mind, just presence. She sat with her hand loosely over Isolde's wrist, not pouring energy, but allowing the warmth to sit there gently, the way you would place a warm stone against a cold hand, and let the temperature equalize gradually. She and Isolde talked during these sessions, not about the legal situation, not about Kalen, not about anything that required weight. They talked about the river, which Isolde missed looking at. They talked about the forest she could not yet run through. They talked about the garden that Isolde had planted 4 years ago, that she had not been able to tend since the gray wasting began. Tell me what it looks like now, Isolde said one afternoon. I have not seen it, Serafina said. Then we will go together when I am better, Isolde said. I want to see what has grown on its own. On the 14th morning after the first healing, Isolde's wolf surfaced completely, for the first time since the illness began. Serafina was not present when it happened. She was in the library, but she heard the howl from across the palace and felt it in the silver-lit part of herself like a sound wave through water. Long and clear and unrestrained, the sound of something that had been confined for a very long time, suddenly free. She put down her pen and sat very still and breathed. 2 minutes later, a knock at the library door. It was one of the ironbound, a young woman named Petra, who had been assigned to Serafina's general vicinity, and who had begun to warm to her in the way that people who observed something closely eventually warmed to it. The Queen sends her gratitude, Petra said. Her voice was carefully professional, but her eyes were bright. Tell her I heard, Serafina said. Petra almost smiled. She left. Serafina turned back to the source texts and the counter-argument she was refining, and she picked up her pen and continued working. The howl had settled into the stone walls of the palace. She could still feel it, faintly, in the hand that held the pen. She thought about the person who had sent her a rosemary plant with no note. She thought about the map covered in marks, and the legal challenge, and the months of work still ahead. She thought, I chose this, every complicated piece of it. She had not chosen to be born silver-blooded. She had not chosen 18 years in the margins of a pack that did not want her. But she had chosen to walk out the gate of Ashvale, and to sit in the East Guest Hall and say, "I am not saying yes, but I am not saying no," and to stay. She had chosen every step since. That was hers, whatever came next. She wrote another paragraph, and the afternoon moved around her, and the palace hummed with the quiet sounds of people doing work that mattered, and in the south wing garden, which Seraphina had learned was directly below Isolde's rooms, the first flowers of the season had opened 3 weeks early. No one had planted them, they had simply come. The Council of Pack Elders convened its formal hearing on the jurisdiction challenge on a cold morning in the 5th week of Seraphina's time at Greymere. She was not required to attend. In fact, Bertram, the legal counsel, had gently suggested it would be better if she did not. The presence of the person at the center of the challenge might be distracting from the legal arguments, which needed to be received on their own merits, without the emotional weight of her being physically in the room. She had agreed, not because she thought he was wrong, but because sitting in a room while a group of people argued about whether she had the right to exist in her current form sounded like one of the worst ways to spend a morning that she could think of. She had done enough of that in Ashvale, standing at the edges of rooms where people talked about the wolfless girl, as if she were not present. She spent the morning in the North Courtyard garden instead. The North Garden was smaller than the South Wing garden, but had been Seraphina's particular territory over the past few weeks, because it was the most neglected part of the palace grounds, a walled space with several raised beds that had clearly been well tended at some point in the past, but had been left increasingly to fend for themselves, the beds going weedy, the paths filling in with moss and small plants that had taken the opportunity of inattention to settle wherever they liked. She found she liked it. The inattention had produced a kind of accidental beauty, the wild things growing where they were not expected, the larger planned plants adjusting over years to the company of the unplanned ones. It was not tidy, but it was alive in a specific way that neatly tended gardens were not. She spent 2 hours in the cold, pulling very little, mostly just walking the paths and crouching beside things, placing her hands in the earth. She was not doing it to produce any particular result. She was doing it because it was grounding, in the most literal sense, the warmth flowing out of her fingers and into the soil, the cool response of the earth against her palms, the sensation of being connected to something that had no politics and no legal challenges and simply existed with full commitment to existing. The flowers that came up near her hands were early, small, white, with a faint silver edge to their petals that she had never seen in any flower before. She did not pick them. She crouched beside them and looked at them for a while. She was sitting on the low wall of one of the raised beds, looking at the map of the North Garden in her mind, thinking about what she might plant in the spring if she were still here in the spring, which was not a certainty but which she was allowing herself to consider, when she heard the garden gate open. She looked up. Kalen came through the gate and stopped when he saw her, which told her he had not known she was here. He was moving with the particular quality of someone who had come somewhere to be alone for a few minutes, the slightly less composed posture of a man who did not think he was being watched. He recovered quickly, which was a thing he was very good at. "The hearing went well," he said. He came to stand at the far end of the path, not approaching her raised bed, respecting the distance. "I heard nothing from inside," she said. "I wanted to tell you myself." He looked around the garden, at the beds, the early flowers, the slightly improved sense of order that had come from 2 hours of her presence without much deliberate effort. The historical argument held. Bertram presented the founding document, the counter-argument on the jurisdiction question, and the specific legal basis for the Silver Envoy designation. Elder Crane objected at length. He paused. The other elders overruled him, 6-2. She looked at her hands, still slightly dirty from the soil. 6-2, she said. "Yes." "Who was the second?" He named another elder she was still learning about. She nodded, filing it. "The Lunar Purity Council will likely challenge through a different channel," she said. "This was not their last move." "Probably not," he said. "But the foundation is established now." "Yes. The Silver Envoy designation is legally recognized. The reinstated protections are active. What you are is, for the first time in 200 years, formally acknowledged to exist within this territory." He said it evenly, in his normal manner, but she heard something underneath it. She looked at him. "That matters to you, beyond the practical benefit." He was quiet for a moment. "My father," he said, spent a considerable part of his reign making things that inconvenience the existing order simply disappear. Not dramatically, quietly. Things that did not fit. People who did not fit. He looked at the flowers near her knee, the early white ones with the silver edges. I have spent 9 years trying to build something different, something with more room in it. He stopped. She waited. Today felt like a step in that direction, he said. She looked at the small white flowers. They were not here before I started coming to this garden, she said. He looked at them too. No. I did not plant them. I know. I do not entirely control what comes out of my hands when I am at rest, she said. Some things just happen. I wanted you to know that, in case the garden continues to produce unexpected things. He looked at her then, directly, with that full quality of attention that she had stopped finding unnerving several weeks ago, and had started finding. She chose her internal words carefully, steadying. I do not mind unexpected things, he said, when they are good ones. She looked at the garden, and then back at him. You came here to be alone. Yes. I can go. He was quiet for a moment. You do not have to. She sat on the raised bed wall and looked at the garden. He sat on the low stone seat at the far end of the path, and for a while they did not speak, and the cold morning moved around them, and the white flowers, with the silver edges, sat very still in the windless air, and the palace made its distant sounds, and it was, she thought, one of the more comfortable silences she had been in. She had not had many comfortable silences in her life. Most silences had carried weight, the weight of something unspoken that was probably unkind, or the weight of her own invisible presence in a space that did not fully acknowledge her. This silence was different. It had presence in it. She was in it, and he was in it, and neither of them was diminished by it. After a while she said, I want to plant something here in the spring. Properly. With a plan. He said, What would you plant? She told him what she had been thinking, the structure of the beds as she imagined them, the varieties she would choose, the way the paths could be reorganized to allow for both deliberate planting and the accidental growth that she was apparently going to continue producing whether she meant to or not. She was not a gardener by training. She was working from instinct and from the books on botany and seasonal growth she had been reading. But she had a clear idea in her mind. He listened in the way he listened to everything, completely, without interrupting. When she finished, he said, There is a glass house on the east side that has not been used since my mother's time. If you want early starts for the spring planting, it would be available. She had not known there was a glass house. She noted this with genuine interest. Your mother gardened? Extensively, he said. She found it the most reliable place to think. She looked at him. You came to this garden to think. He said nothing. Then perhaps it runs in the family, she said. He looked at her with that expression that was not quite a smile, but was the room where a smile might live if it were ever allowed to come in. Perhaps, he said. She stood and dusted the soil from her clothes and looked at the garden one more time. Thank you for telling me about the hearing yourself, she said. I told you I would not hide things from you, he said. You told me that at the beginning, she said. I notice you have kept it. She walked toward the garden gate. She stopped with her hand on the old iron latch and turned back. I will bring you a list of what I want to plant, she said, in case the glass house becomes relevant. Bring it whenever you are ready, he said. She pushed the gate open and walked out into the pale morning light, and behind her, in the cold and slightly wild north garden, a second cluster of small white flowers opened near the stone seat where he was sitting. She did not see them, but he did. The second attack came from inside. Serafina learned this the way she was learning to learn most things at Greymere, not from being told, but from paying attention. She had been in the east wing corridor moving from her room to the library when she noticed that the morning patterns were wrong. Gertrude, who always moved through the household with a brisk and orderly precision, was standing at the far end of the corridor in conversation with an iron-bound officer, and her hands were clasped in the specific way that Serafina had learned meant she was holding herself together under considerable internal pressure. 3 members of the household staff had been redirected from their usual morning routes. The breakfast table, which she could see through the open dining room door, was set for 2 rather than 3. She went to find Aldrich. She found him in his own room, which he rarely occupied fully during working hours. poring over a document with an expression that matched Gertrude's hands. "What happened?" she said. He looked up. He was not going to manage the information. That had been established early between them, and had held. Last night, during the evening shift change, 2 members of the household staff were found to have provided access credentials to 3 individuals who entered the palace grounds through the south servants' entrance. The Lunar Purity Council. Almost certainly. The 3 individuals were intercepted by the Ironbound before they reached the inhabited wing. They are now being held. He paused. But the staff members who assisted them had access to the schedules, the room assignments, the layout of the East Wing. He looked at her steadily. They had access to the information of where you sleep. She stood very still for a moment, processing this. Then she said, "Were they trying to remove me from the palace, or harm me?" "That is what is being determined," Aldrich said. "The 3 individuals are not talking." She sat down. "And the staff members?" "One has cooperated fully, and is giving information. The other has not yet spoken." She looked at the window. The morning was overcast, the light flat and gray, the kind of day that pressed down slightly on everything under it. "They were inside for how long, before the Ironbound found them?" she asked. "Approximately 11 minutes, Aldrich said. She thought about 11 minutes. About what 11 minutes of undetected access to the East Wing could have looked like if the Ironbound had not found them. She found, to her own mild surprise, that she was not spiraling into the fear of the hypothetical. She was simply calculating. "I need to speak with Kalen," she said. "He is conducting the inquiry." "I know. I need to be present for it." Aldrich looked at her for a moment. "He may want to protect you from the details. He has told me repeatedly that he will not hide things from me," she said. "I am going to hold him to that." She found him in the lower hall that served as the Ironbound's official interrogation space, a room she had not been in before, functional and deliberately plain, the kind of space designed to have nothing interesting in it. He was standing, not sitting, the way he stood when he was working with intensity, and found chairs a poor use of energy. He looked up when she came in. The Ironbound officer beside him looked uncertain. Kalen did not look uncertain. He looked at her steadily for a moment. "Aldrich told you," he said. "Yes. I was going to." "I know," she said. "I did not want to wait." She looked around the room, then back at him. "What have you learned so far?" He looked at her for another moment. Then he turned to the officer and gave a quiet instruction, and the officer left the room. He pulled out a chair and sat down, which was unusual enough that she registered it immediately. She sat across from him. He told her everything. The names of the staff members. What the cooperative one had said, that she had been approached 3 months ago, before Serafina even arrived at Greymere, by someone who identified themselves as a council representative, and offered a sum of money in exchange for future cooperation, if the Silver Blood ever appeared at the palace. The offer had seemed academic at the time, she had said. She had not fully believed the Silver Blood was real. 3 months ago, Serafina said. "Yes, before we met in Ashvale." She looked at the table. "Then they were already organizing in anticipation of you finding me. It appears so." She processed this. "They knew you were looking." "Aldrich's research was not as private as I believed in the early years," he said. "I became more careful as it progressed, but the beginning stages were visible to anyone paying close attention to what materials he was acquiring, what questions he was asking through the academic networks. His expression was even, but she knew his face well enough by now to read what was underneath it. Controlled frustration, directed entirely inward. He felt he should have seen this sooner. "You cannot prepare for everything," she said. He looked at her. "You cannot," she said again. "The gap in the preparation was very early. You have made no mistakes since. I arrived here 8 weeks ago, and nothing has actually reached me." She looked at him steadily. "I am not hurt. I am not gone. And we now know substantially more about the shape of this than we did yesterday." He was quiet for a moment. "You are remarkably calm." "I grew up in a place where danger was ordinary," she said, "where I was considered lesser by default, and had to navigate every day knowing that someone might decide to make that active rather than passive. I know what it feels like to live in a space where not everyone means you well. It is familiar territory." She said this not to make him feel worse. She said it because it was true, and because it was relevant, and because she was not going to pretend that Greymere's complications were the first complicated thing she had survived. He said, "The woman who cooperated." She expressed regret. "I believe she regrets the consequences," Serafina said. "That is different from regret for the choice." She paused. "I am not saying that with cruelty. I understand the appeal of money to someone who has little, but I am not going to perform forgiveness I have not actually arrived at yet." He nodded. "That is fair. What happens to the 3 who were intercepted?" she asked. "They will be formally charged under the laws regarding unlawful entry into palace grounds with intent," he said, "and under the reinstated Silverblood protection statutes, the first time those statutes have been invoked in active law." She looked at him. "That will establish precedent." "Yes," he said, "it will." She sat back. She thought about what it meant, for the protections written into the charter, to move from words on paper to something invoked in a real situation, in a real case, on record. It would mean that the statutes were not theoretical, they were operational. Any future council member or legal challenger would have to contend with them as living law, not historical curiosity. "Good," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Are you all right?" She considered the question properly, the way she considered all questions that deserved real answers. "Yes," she said. "I am more alert than comfortable right now, but I am not afraid in a way that is stopping me thinking clearly. If you want to move rooms, I want to review the security arrangements for my wing," she said. "I want to understand what was possible, and why, and what has been changed since last night. I want to do it tonight, not later." He stood. "I will arrange it." They walked the East Wing together that evening, with the senior ironbound officer named Gareth, who had an efficient and direct manner that she found easy to work with. He explained the previous arrangements and the modifications that had been implemented during the day. She asked questions. Several of them came from angles he had not considered, and he received them with the straightforward professionalism of someone who cared more about the security than his ego. When they were done, Kaelin walked her to her door. "You are good at this," he said. "At what?" "At understanding systems, finding the gaps." "I had to understand the systems that were working against me for most of my life," she said. "Systems are easier to map when you are the person they are designed to exclude. You see the shape of them differently from the outside." He was quiet for a moment. They stood at the door of her room, the corridor empty behind him. "When I first saw you in the courtyard at Ashvale," he said, "I thought you were exactly what you appeared to be. A low-rank worker doing her job." "I was exactly what I appeared to be," she said. "But you were also considerably more." "Everyone is," she said. "When someone takes the trouble to actually look." She put her hand on the door handle. "I was seen, in that courtyard. For the first time in years, properly seen. I have been thinking about that, about what it costs a person, not to be seen for a long time." He said nothing, but his expression shifted in the small, careful way she had learned to read. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. He stood in the corridor, and she went inside, and she heard him stand there for a moment, just a moment, before his footsteps moved away down the hall. She sat on her bed in the dark. She pressed her palm against the stone wall. The warmth moved out of her hand into the stone, and she sat there for a while, breathing, feeling the familiar connection. In the corridor outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the palace, the ironbound at their stations, the soft movement of household staff, the building itself settling in the cold. All of it the sound of a place that was guarded, that was tended, that was alive. She had been here 8 weeks. She had fought a curse. She had written a legal challenge. She had walked through a garden at dawn and sat in a comfortable silence. She had looked at a man who was learning, with great difficulty, to have room for things that did not fit his prior understanding of the world. She thought, "I am going to be all right." Not because everything was safe. Not because the complications were resolved, but because she was herself, fully, now, with her eyes open and her hands warm, and the truth of what she was finally given the space it deserved. She was going to be all right. The formal trial of the 3 individuals captured in the palace breach happened 12 days later. It was a public proceeding, which Serafina had not expected. She had assumed it would be handled through the palace's internal legal mechanisms, quietly, efficiently, out of sight. She was wrong. Kaelin held it in the main council chamber, with the full council of pack elders in attendance, and representatives from every pack within 3 territorial zones. She understood when she sat and thought about it, turned an internal security matter into a public demonstration. She attended. She was not required to testify. The iron-bound officers who had intercepted the individuals provided the witness accounts, supported by the physical evidence gathered in the 11 minutes of breach. The cooperative household staff member testified at length. The second staff member also spoke, in the end, after a private meeting with the legal counsel that Serafina was not present for. What she was present for was the moment when the charges were formally read, and the silver blood protection statutes were invoked by name for the first time in over 200 years. The council chamber went very quiet when it happened. She was aware of the elders, some she knew by name now, others still learning, receiving the words with varying expressions, some with discomfort, most with something closer to careful attention. Elder Crane, who had been the dissenting vote in the jurisdiction hearing, looked at the front of the room during the reading of the statutes, with an expression she could only describe as a man who was working very hard to believe that the ground beneath his position was still solid. She thought it might not be. When the formal verdict was rendered, guilty on all counts, sentencing to follow under the applicable statutes, she sat in her seat and looked at the front of the room, and thought about the fact that this day would be in the official record. That someone, someday, could open the record of this council chamber and find that on this date, in this room, silver blood protection laws had been invoked and upheld. That the designation had moved from reinstated theory to living fact in a publicly witnessed proceeding. She had done that, not alone, but she had been the reason it happened. After the council chamber emptied, she found Kalen in the corridor outside. He was moving through the departing crowd of elders and pack representatives, with the efficiency of someone who had many things to address, nodding and speaking briefly with several people as he went. He saw her and crossed toward her through the moving crowd without appearing to hurry. "The elder from the Eastern Cluster spoke to me before the verdict," he said, when he reached her. "Voluntarily. He said he found the original founding document argument compelling. He is interested in reviewing the full historical record Aldrich has compiled. He represents 3 packs," she said. 4, Kalen said. She thought about 4 packs. About how the legal argument had begun in a library, with old texts and her handwriting, and Aldrich's coffee cup growing cold, and had traveled to a council chamber, and then to an elder in a corridor, and was now moving into 4 packs where there were perhaps hundreds of wolves, who had never thought about silver blood in their lives, and who were about to encounter a different frame for thinking about it. It was slow, it was incremental, but it was real. "What is the Eastern Cluster elder's name?" she asked. Kalen told her. She filed it. "I would like to meet him," she said, "when it is appropriate, not to persuade him, just to meet him. People are more difficult to fear when they are specific." Kalen looked at her. "You want to be specific to as many people as possible. I want people who have been given a distorted picture of what I am to have an accurate one instead," she said. "The distortion has been operating for 200 years. I am not going to correct it in a morning, but I can be a person in a room instead of a concept on a piece of paper, and that is something." He was quiet for a moment. Around them the council corridor continued to empty, voices receding, the sounds of formal proceedings giving way to the ordinary sounds of a building returning to itself. "The Lunar Purity Council sent a response to your letter," he said. He had been holding this, she realized, choosing when to say it. She straightened slightly. "What did they say?" "Their representative said that your letter was noted, that it did not change their position, but," he paused with something careful in the pause, "they sent the response through the official council correspondence channels, not through back channels, not through an intermediary who was not identified." He looked at her. "They chose official correspondence, which means they are treating you as a legitimate correspondent." She processed that. It was not recognition, it was not acceptance, but it was a shift from treating her as a thing to be managed to treating her as a party to be addressed. A small shift, an important one. "Good," she said. "You are not surprised." "I am slightly surprised," she said honestly. "But I thought the letter might do something. Even angry people sometimes find accurate information difficult to entirely ignore." He looked at her for a long moment. The corridor was almost empty now. The light coming through the high windows of the council hall was afternoon light, gold and level. "I want to tell you something," he said, "that I would prefer to say here, rather than in a formal setting. She waited. "When I saw your blood in the courtyard in Ashvale," he said, "my first thought was the cure. My first thought was entirely about what it meant for Isolde and for the search I had been conducting for years. That is the honest account." He stopped. "My second thought, in approximately the same moment, was that someone had just struck you without cause in front of me, and that you had not made a sound, and that the way you pressed your hand to the ground to hide what was happening told me you had been hiding things for a long time, without anyone ever questioning why you had to." She was completely still. "The first thought drove me to send you the note," he said. "The second thought drove everything else." She looked at him. She had become quite good at reading his face, and what she found there now was the particular expression of someone who had said a true thing, and was not dressing it up or retreating from it. Someone simply letting the true thing sit in the air between them. She said, "I know. Do you?" "I could tell," she said. "Not immediately, but in the interrogation room in Ashvale, when you gave me the choice to refuse. The way you said it, I could tell the refusal was genuinely available. Someone who only cared about the cure would not have left that space so clearly open." She looked at him. "I have been in enough rooms with people who said one thing and meant another to know the difference," he said. "And what did you think, when you realized?" She considered this carefully. "I thought it was more complicated than I had expected, and that complicated was something I had more room for than I thought I did." She looked at the empty corridor. "I am still learning the shape of this. All of it. This place, this position, what I am." She looked back at him. "I am not rushing any of it." He nodded, not with relief. He was not someone who expressed relief easily, with something quieter, a settling. "Neither am I," he said. She looked at him for a moment more. Then she began walking toward the east wing. He fell into step beside her, and they walked through the emptied corridor together, and neither of them spoke, and the afternoon light came through the high windows and landed on the stone floor, in long warm stripes that they walked through one by one. She thought about a girl in a cold room, pressing her glowing hands against a stone wall in the dark, wondering what she was. She thought, she always was this, even then. She always was. The investigation into Lord Hestevan began without his knowledge, on the 43rd day of Seraphina's time at Greymere. It began with her, though she did not know it immediately. She had been conducting the second full healing session with Isolde, scheduled carefully, 3 weeks after the first, when her energy had fully rebuilt, and Aldrich had confirmed through his careful assessments that Isolde's system was stable enough for a deeper session. The first healing had removed the root of the curse. The second was intended to address the residual damage, the places where the grey wasting had been eating at Isolde's wolf bond and her health for 8 months, the worn thin connections that would heal naturally, but slowly without assistance. She went in with complete attention and steady hands. Aldrich at the window, Kaelin at the door. The residual damage was not as resistant as the root had been. Without the core of the curse directing the darkness, the remaining traces were scattered and fading on their own. Her work was more like following behind a retreating tide, finding the places it had scoured, and helping the ground recover, than fighting something active and combative. It was gentler than the first session. It was also, in some ways, more precise. She had to look carefully to find the places that needed attention, tracing faint lines of damage through the layers of Isolde's restored health like following old footprints. It took 2 hours. When she came out of the focus state, she was tired, but not depleted, and Isolde was sitting up with her wolf bright behind her eyes, and her color completely restored. "I feel whole," Isolde said, simply and directly, the way she said most things. "You are whole," Seraphina said. "The rest is just time." She stood and stretched and looked out the window, and it was in the act of turning back to say something to Aldrich that she noticed the detail she had filed and not yet fully examined. During the second session, while she was tracing the residual damage, she had felt something she had noticed in the first session, but had not stopped to examine fully. A quality to the darkness, something specific about its construction. She had been focused on the healing itself during the first session, on managing the resistance, on not letting the cold reach her chest. She had not had attention to spare for analysis. But today, with less resistance and more room to observe, she had felt it clearly. The curse had a signature. Dark magic always did, Aldrich had explained to her in their early sessions. The way a skilled craftsperson's work carried identifying qualities that another skilled person could recognize. She was not a scholar of dark magic. She did not have the training to read that signature in any specific or nameable way, but she was silver-blooded, and her silver nature responded to darkness the way it responded to damage, with recognition. She recognized this, not from her own experience, from the books. She pulled Aldrich aside while Isolde rested and told him what she had felt. She described it as precisely as she could, the specific quality of the structure, the particular way it had been anchored at the root level, the layering of it. He listened with his full scholar's attention, not writing anything down, simply listening. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You said it was layered in 3 distinct strata," he said. "Yes." Each stratum appeared to serve a different function. The outer layer was concealment. It was designed to look like natural illness to anyone examining from the outside. The middle layer was the active deterioration mechanism, and the root layer was the anchor that held the whole structure in place. 3 strata dark magic construction, Aldrich said slowly, is not a common technique. It requires significant skill and specific training in a tradition that has not been widely practiced for several decades. I know of perhaps a dozen individuals in the current territory who would have the knowledge. He paused. I know of fewer who would have both the knowledge and the access to Isolde that placing this curse would have required. Serafina looked at him. Access to Isolde, meaning someone who was physically near her. A dark magic curse of this specificity and precision cannot be placed at distance, he said. Someone was within arm's reach of her on a specific occasion. Given the depth of the anchor layer, I would estimate the placement took place somewhere between 8 and 12 months ago, which is when the gray wasting began, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about what that meant. Someone inside the palace. Someone who had been close enough to Isolde to place a constructed, 3-layered curse without her knowledge, 8 months ago. You have a name in mind, she said. She was watching his face. He looked uncomfortable in the way that careful people looked uncomfortable when they were about to say something with significant implications. I have a suspicion, he said. I want to be very careful about that word. I could be wrong. Tell me, she said. He told her. The name was Lord Hestevan, a senior palace advisor, present at court for more than 15 years, with a background in formal Wolf Clan politics that included, in his earlier career, training in several of the older magic traditions. He had been present at the state dinner 8 months ago, where Isolde had fallen ill for the first time. He had a noted ideological position that the Queen's lineage was insufficiently powerful for her station. He had access. He had knowledge. He had motive. Serafina said, We need to tell Kaelin. Yes, Aldrich said. Carefully. Now, she said. They found him in his study. She told him everything, the way she always told him things, directly, beginning with the observation, moving through the reasoning, arriving at the conclusion, and being explicit about where the evidence was solid and where it was inference. She was careful. She did not dress the inference up as fact. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was very still for a moment. How certain are you, he said, about the 3-strata construction? Could you be misreading what you felt? I could be, she said. I am not trained in dark magic assessment. What I am is silver-blooded, and I felt the structure of that curse twice from the inside. Aldrich says that silver blood perception of dark magic is considered reliable in the old texts. She looked at him steadily. I am not asking you to act on it without confirmation. I am asking you to investigate it. Get your own confirmation. Talk to Aldrich about the specific tradition the construction belongs to, and find out who in your court has that training. He said, If you are right. I know, she said. I know what it means if I am right. A long silence. He stood. I am going to speak with Gareth. Keep it contained, she said. If Hestevan knows he is being looked at, he will remove evidence. Kaelin looked at her. I know how to conduct an investigation, he said, and there was the small edge in it that she had occasionally heard, not directed at her, but carrying the weight of a man who was very good at what he did, and occasionally felt the need to note that. I know you do, she said, without backing down. I am reminding you, because I want this to be right. He was willing to end Isolde's life slowly from the inside. I want his exposure to be thorough. The edge faded. He nodded. The investigation lasted 7 days. She was not involved in its mechanics. That was Kalen's domain, and Gareth's, and the palace's internal security operation, which functioned with a thoroughness that she was gradually learning to appreciate. She went about her work, she met with Aldrich, she visited the North Garden, where the early flowers had multiplied substantially, and where 2 visiting household staff had stopped to look at them with puzzled and slightly delighted expressions. She had a long conversation with Isolde, who was beginning to sit in the south wing garden in the afternoons, face turned toward the sun. She did not ask for updates. She had said what she had to say. The next steps were not hers. On the 8th morning, Kalen came to find her in the library. He sat down across from her at the table, not across the room, not at the window, directly across from her, and said, "Hestevan trained under a scholar named Gideon Trace, in the Old South tradition, 22 years ago. Trace is documented as one of fewer than 10 practitioners of 3-strata construction alive in this generation. We have a signed record of the training." She put down her pen. "We found a correspondence in his private rooms," he continued, "between Hestevan and a representative of the Lunar Purity Council, going back 14 months. He believed Isolde's lineage was improper for her position. He believed removing her would force a politically stronger match. He was operating independently of the main council. They had not authorized this, but he shared their broader ideology." She sat back. "He was going to let her die slowly," she said. Not a question, just saying the shape of it out loud so it was real. "Yes," Kalen said. "Inside your home," she said. "Inside my home," he said. His voice was entirely level. His hands, she noticed, were flat on the table, in the deliberate way of someone who had decided not to let them do anything else. "What happens now?" she asked. "He will be formally charged in an open proceeding," Kalen said. "Before the full council, with everything on the table, the training record, the correspondence, the evidence from the palace rooms, and your testimony about the curse construction." She looked at him. "You want me to testify? I want you to be there," he said. "The testimony from you, from the person who was inside the curse, who felt its structure from the source, is the most direct evidence we have of the nature of what was placed in Isolde. The scholars can speak to the theoretical matching of the construction to the tradition, but you can speak to the fact of it, what it felt like, what it was." She thought about standing in a council chamber and describing what she had felt during the healing, about putting into words something that lived in a part of her that did not entirely have words yet. She thought about the elders in that chamber who had watched the jurisdiction hearing, who were still calibrating what she was and what she represented. She thought about Isolde, sitting in the south garden in the afternoon sun. "When is the proceeding?" she said. 3 days, he said. "I will be ready," she said. He stood. He was not going to thank her, because he had understood by now that she did not need that she was not doing this as a favor, but as a choice, and that treating it as a favor would reduce it. She was grateful for that understanding. "One more thing," she said. He looked at her. "The proceeding should be completely open," she said. "Not just the council elders, the representatives of all the packs in the territory. The public record." She met his eyes. He tried to remove a queen through a slow, hidden method. The exposure of that should be equally public. Every pack should know what was done and how it was found. He looked at her for a long time. "You are right," he said. She turned back to her book. Behind her, she heard him leave, and she sat in the library with the afternoon light, and the sound of the palace around her, and the clean, clear weight of what was coming. She was going to stand in a room full of people who had varying opinions about her existence, and she was going to tell them the truth about what she had felt, and that truth was going to have consequences that she could not fully predict. She was not afraid. She was ready. The proceeding convened 3 days later, in the main council chamber of Greymere, which had been opened to accommodate a much larger gathering than its usual sessions. Word had moved through the territory in the 3 days since the announcement. Not the specific details, those had been kept carefully managed, but the fact of a major formal proceeding, which traveled through wolf communities the way important news always traveled, fast, incomplete, and electrically charged. The chamber was at capacity when Serafina entered with Aldrich, and there were people standing in the gallery above. She recognized faces from the jurisdiction hearing, and faces she did not know, and the particular quality of attention that a large room held when it was waiting for something that mattered. She did not look at the gallery. She walked to the seat that had been placed for her on the left side of the chamber, near the front, and she sat down and looked at the front of the room. Estevan was already present, with his legal representative beside him, and a posture that she studied with careful attention. He was attempting composure, and he had some training in it, but underneath the composure, there was something rigid. The rigidity of a structure that knew it was being examined and was working very hard to hold its form. He looked at her once when she entered. It was a brief look, quickly withdrawn. She held it long enough to note it and then looked away. The proceeding opened with the formal reading of charges. The chamber was very quiet during the reading. When the specific legal statutes were cited, including the silver blood protection statutes for the second time in the public record, she heard the room shift slightly. Not noise, just the subtle physical shift of many people reacting to a word in a space. She was called to speak third, after the iron-bound officer who had secured the evidence from Estevan's rooms and the scholar Aldrich had connected them with, who confirmed the theoretical match between the three-strata construction and Estevan's documented training. She stood and walked to the witness position at the front of the chamber and looked at the council elders arranged before her and the full chamber behind them. She was aware of the size of the room in a way that she was not usually aware of spaces, the weight of it, the attention concentrated in it. She said what she had to say. She described the first healing session, entering Isolde's bloodstream with her silver energy, meeting the dark construction, feeling its structure. She described the three strata as clearly as she could, working through each layer and what it was doing, translating the sensation of it into words as carefully and precisely as she could manage. She was not performing. She was not trying to be dramatic. She was reporting what she had experienced with the same precise attention she brought to everything, because accurate information mattered, and this was the most important account she had been asked to give. She described the second session, and the clearer view it gave her of the construction, without the active resistance of the core. She described the quality of what she had felt, the deliberateness of it, the specific and practiced nature of the layering, the evidence that this was not random or accidental, but constructed with intent and knowledge. She said, at the end, "I am not a scholar of dark magic. I cannot name the specific tradition from academic training. What I can tell you is what I felt from the inside, twice, under conditions that made concealment impossible, and what I felt was a deliberate structure, built with significant skill, by someone who knew what they were building and why. It was placed with intent. It was intended to kill." The chamber was very quiet. She said, "I am 18 years old. I grew up in a pack where I was told I had no value because I did not fit the category they understood. I came to this palace because someone finally looked at me and saw what I actually was. What I found here was a queen who had been quietly targeted by someone who decided that she did not fit his understanding of the proper order of things. I understand that feeling. I understand what it means to be someone's idea of a problem." She looked at the elders directly. "This is what the belief that the world should only contain certain kinds of things produces, not philosophical purity. This." She walked back to her seat. The chamber remained quiet for a moment that was longer than chamber silences usually were. Then the proceedings continued. Estevan's representative mounted a defense that was careful and technically sound, and had, as its central argument, the position that the silver blood testimony was not a recognized form of legal evidence under the existing framework. Kalen addressed this himself. He stood at the front of the chamber and said, in the level, precise manner that she had learned meant he was speaking from full conviction. The silver blood protection statutes that this territory has reinstated include specific provisions for silver-blooded testimony in matters involving dark magic. Those provisions exist because the old laws recognized that silver blood perception has a unique capacity in this specific domain. The framework has been updated. The objection does not hold under the current legal structure of this territory. Estevan's representative had no strong counter to that. The verdict was delivered the same afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Estevan was stripped of his title and his council seat in the chamber, a formal and specific act that was witnessed by everyone present. His sentencing would follow the established statutes: exile from the territory, formal legal transfer to the applicable human magistrate courts for the dark magic charges, which operated under a different but complementary legal framework. It was not an execution. It was not a brutal public display. It was a methodical, witnessed, formally documented removal of someone who had used a position of trust to cause serious harm. processed through law, on the record, available to anyone who looked at the official proceedings of this date. She thought, he did not get to be secret. He did not get to hide inside the legitimate structure of this place. He got to be seen. After the chamber emptied, Elder Crane from the northern cluster approached her in the corridor. She had not spoken to him before. He was a tall, older man with white eyebrows and the manner of someone who had formed his position on most things a long time ago and found revising it uncomfortable but not impossible. He said, "Your testimony was thorough." "Thank you," she said. He looked at her for a moment. She waited, because she had learned that people who were working through something said more when you did not fill the space for them. "I have been part of the elder body for 16 years, he said. "I have known Hestevan for most of that time." Another pause. "I voted against the jurisdiction challenge because I believed the legal argument for the Silver Envoy designation was insufficient. I was wrong about the argument. That is what the founding document established." She looked at him steadily. "I have also held a position," he said carefully, "that the traditional structure of the wolf hierarchy represents the complete and proper order. I have been a member of the Lunar Purity Council as an observer, not as an active member. I want to be transparent about that." He met her eyes. "What was demonstrated in that chamber today is that the position I have held allows space for people to do what Hestevan did and call it principled. I am working through what I think about that." She said, "I appreciate you telling me." "I am not asking for your forgiveness," he said. "I do not think I have earned the right to ask for that." "No," she said, "but the working through is real. I can see that." He nodded. He looked like someone who had been carrying something large and had recently been given a clearer picture of what it weighed. He said, "Your letter, the one you sent to the council." "Yes?" "Several members found it difficult to dismiss." He paused. "Including me. Including Elder Crane, the private person, not Elder Crane, the observer." She said nothing, but she heard it. He gave a short formal nod and walked away. She stood in the corridor and watched him go, and thought about letters written honestly and sent without expectation of response, and what they sometimes did in the time they spent being read. Aldrich appeared beside her. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. "Hestevan," he said, 20 years of holding this court, 15 years advising the king. And in the end, what exposed him was a girl who read the curse from the inside, because she was born with something old in her blood that the world had spent 2 centuries pretending did not exist." He shook his head slowly. "I find that very satisfying." She looked at him. "I find it more complicated than satisfying." "That is because you are wise," he said. "I am merely a scholar. I am allowed to find things satisfying." She almost laughed. It came close to the surface, and she let it go, just slightly, into a smile that she felt the unusual freedom of letting be visible. "Come," she said. "I want tea." They walked together through the palace toward the library, and the late afternoon light came through the high windows in warm, long bars, and the palace around them moved with its ordinary sounds. And somewhere in the south garden, Isolde was sitting in the sun, with her wolf fully present, and her eyes open to the world she had almost lost. Spring came to Greymere 11 weeks after Seraphina arrived. It came the way spring always came in the north, gradually and then suddenly, the cold losing its certainty over several weeks, and then one morning simply gone, replaced by air that carried possibility in it. The river below the cliff was higher and faster, fed by the snowmelt from the upper ridges. The courtyard trees put out their first tender leaves. The north garden, which had spent the winter looking wild and slightly abandoned, produced a profusion of early growth that was not entirely explainable by the season alone. Seraphina was in that garden the morning the formal documents arrived. She had been there since just after sunrise, working alongside a young man from the household staff named Edwin, who had expressed genuine interest in the garden, and who had, over the past several weeks, become something like an apprentice. Not formally designated as one, just a person who showed up with questions and stayed to work. She had given him a section of the raised beds to manage and was learning alongside him, because her instinct for what the plants needed and his practical knowledge of how to address what they needed turned out to complement each other in useful ways. She was deciding whether a particular bed needed to be turned over again when Gertrude appeared at the garden gate. Gertrude did not usually come to the garden. The garden was Serafina's territory, and Gertrude respected territories. The fact of her presence here, combined with the specific expression she was wearing, told Serafina that something had happened. "The formal documents from the senior council," Gertrude said. "They arrived this morning." She handed them over without another word, which Serafina appreciated. She pulled off her work gloves and took the envelope and opened it. It was the official senior council's response to the Hestevan proceeding and to the jurisdiction challenge resolution, a formal statement, signed by the majority of the body, that acknowledged the legal validity of the Silver Envoy designation, the reinstatement of the Silver Blood Protection Statutes, and, in its final paragraph, a statement that the Council recognized the need to review several historical provisions of pack law that had been established during the period of Silver Blood decline. Not an apology, not a dramatic reversal, just a formal, official, witnessed acknowledgement that some things that had been set aside needed to be looked at again. She read it twice, folded it, slipped it back into the envelope. She looked at Edwin, who was carefully pretending to examine a plant, and absolutely listening. "Good news?" he asked. "Progress," she said, which is what good news usually looks like in practice. She went inside to find Kalen. He was in his study, as he usually was at this hour, and he had clearly also seen the document, because there was a copy on his desk, and his posture had the particular quality that she now recognized as settled rather than at rest, the difference between a man who had put something down because he was done with it, and a man who had put something down because it had resolved itself correctly. She sat in the chair across from his desk without being invited. She had stopped waiting for an invitation several weeks ago. He had not commented on this. "The senior council," she said. "Yes. It is not everything." "No," he agreed. "There will be more proceedings, more challenges. The Lunar Purity Council has not disbanded. Their active membership has dropped significantly since the Hestevan proceedings became public, but they are still organized and still holding their core position." He looked at her steadily. "This is a long process." "I know," she said. "I have read enough history now to understand that the things that change permanently change slowly." She put the envelope on his desk beside his copy. "But this is real. This is on the record, signed, witnessed. It cannot be removed." He looked at the two envelopes side by side. "No," he said. "It cannot." She looked at the map on his wall. It had changed over the weeks. New marks, some additions, a few things erased and redrawn. She had been learning it progressively, asking questions when she had them, building a picture of the territory's shape that she could now navigate in her mind with reasonable confidence. "The Eastern Cluster Elder," she said. "Elder Crane." "Yes?" "I want to visit his territory." He looked at her. "Visit how?" "Officially. As the Silver Envoy. I want to go to the 3 packs nearest the northern border, and meet the people there. Not to make arguments. Not to negotiate anything specific. Just to be present." She met his eyes. "The most powerful thing I can do right now is not stay in this palace. It is to go to the places where people have only heard stories about what I am, and be a person instead of a story." He was quiet for a moment. "The security implications of leaving the palace grounds are significant and need to be planned carefully," she said. "I am not suggesting tomorrow. I am suggesting we plan it. Properly." She looked at him. "You told me when I came here that my protections were not contingent on staying inside. I am going to hold you to that." He looked at her. The silver-gray eyes with everything behind them that she had spent 11 weeks learning to read. She was not done learning to read them, but she had a foundation now. "All right," he said. "We will plan it." "Good," she said. She stood. She went back toward the door. "Serafina." She stopped and looked back. He had stood from his desk, which was not something he usually did when she was leaving. He was looking at her with an expression that was doing something she had not quite seen it do before, careful and open at the same time, which in his face required specific and deliberate effort. "I want to say something," he said. "That is not about legal proceedings or territory visits or planning." She waited. "When I came to Ashvale," he said, "I was looking for a specific thing. I was precise and focused and entirely certain about what I needed and why I needed it." He stopped, looked at the window, looked back at her. "I found considerably more than I was looking for. And I have been, In the time since, trying to work out what the honest and appropriate thing to say about that is. She looked at him. She thought about the rosemary plant with no note, about a man standing in a corridor for a moment longer than necessary, about a garden where flowers grew near where he sat. She said, "You could start by saying it as plainly as you think something like that can be said." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "I did not expect you. Any part of you. The way you read documents. The way you talk to people. The way you put your hands in the earth and make things grow without trying. The way you told me to drink my tea before it went cold and walked out of a room full of my warriors without looking back." He stopped. "I have been running this territory for 9 years. I have been very good at it. I have not often found someone who made me feel that the way I had been running it was smaller than it needed to be." She was very still. "You made me want more room in it," he said. "For things that do not fit. For things I had not considered. For you, specifically." He looked at her directly. "That is what I wanted to say plainly." She looked at him for a long time. She had grown up being told she was nothing, had spent 18 years quiet and careful and diminished. She had arrived here 11 weeks ago as a person with nothing to offer, except the strange and stubborn fact of what she was, and she had built something here, step by careful step, on her own terms, with her eyes open. She was not going to be swept off her feet by anything. That was not who she was. She moved carefully, she decided deliberately. She kept her eyes open at all times. She had been very clear about this with herself from the beginning. She said, "I find you considerably more human than I expected, and considerably more worth knowing." He was quiet. "I am not rushing anything," she said. "You should know that about me by now." "I know," he said. "And neither should you." "I know that too," he said. She nodded. She looked at him once more, with the full attention she brought to things that mattered. Then she went to find her mother. Alara was in the household workroom with her corner and her sewing, and she looked up when Serafina came in, with the particular expression of a mother who had been watching something unfold over several weeks, and had her own clear views about it, and had been waiting to be asked. Serafina sat down beside her and told her about the senior council documents. Alara listened carefully, her hands still working. "And the other thing?" Alara said, when Serafina had finished. She looked at her mother. "What other thing?" Alara gave her the look that had existed as long as Serafina could remember, the look that meant, "I am your mother, and you are telling me the facts, while omitting the heart of the matter, and I see this clearly." Serafina was quiet for a moment. "That is still being determined," she said. Alara nodded. Her hands kept working. She said, "Your father used to hold things in his hands without knowing he was warming them." She said it simply, without looking up. "I always thought that was one of the most honest things about him. He could not help giving warmth to whatever was near him. He could not turn it off." Serafina looked at her own hands, the faint silver-lit veins, the warmth that lived in her palms. "I know," she said. "So do I," Alara said. She sat with her mother for a while, the two of them in the workroom, with its good afternoon light and the sounds of the household around them, and she thought about what it meant to come from someone who could not help giving warmth to whatever was near him. She thought about what it meant to be that person's daughter, growing up without knowing it, carrying the warmth in her hands all her life, without understanding what it was. She understood now. The formal ceremony to publicly declare the Silver Envoy designation was held in the main courtyard 3 days later. It was not an elaborate ceremony. She had specifically requested that it not be, because elaborate ceremonies had a way of being about the spectacle rather than the substance. What she wanted was a ceremony that said exactly what it meant, and nothing extra. The full palace household was present, along with the 4 elders who had traveled to Greymere for the senior council response, and representatives from the nearest 12 packs. A public record was read, clearly and completely, stating the designation, the protections, and the legal basis for both. It was witnessed and signed in the record. And then Kalen Duskmore, the Alpha King of this territory, the man whose name had been used to end arguments and frighten children for years, who had lost something of his terrifying reputation over the past 11 weeks through the gradual accumulation of a public record that showed him acting according to principle rather than power alone. He stood in the center of the courtyard. And he bowed. Not the formal half-bow of official exchange, A full, deliberate, genuine bow, head down, held for a specific moment, the kind of gesture that in the formal tradition of wolf hierarchies meant, I see you clearly, and I name your worth. It was not a bow of submission, it was a bow of recognition. There was a significant difference, and everyone present understood it. The courtyard was completely silent. She stood and received it with her hands at her sides, and her chin level, and her eyes fully open, the way she received everything, without flinching and without performance, just present and real, and entirely herself. Then she extended her right hand to him, palm up, silver glowing faintly in the veins of her wrist in the morning light, steady and unashamed, not offered as a thing of power, not a demonstration, just her hand, everything it was. He took it. The handshake lasted the formal length and released, and she looked at the gathered witnesses, and the elders, and the pack representatives, and the household staff, and her mother, standing near the back with quiet shining eyes, and she looked at Aldrich, with his white disordered hair, and the expression of a scholar, who had found what he spent his life looking for. She thought about the letter under the old mattress in Ashvale, that she had not brought with her when she left, because she did not need to bring it. Do not run. She had not run. She had walked forward, eyes open, into every complicated thing, and it had led her here, to this morning, to this courtyard, to this exact moment of being fully and publicly known. She was not done, not even close. The territory visits were still to be planned. The Lunar Purity Council was still organized. The legal landscape was still being mapped. The senior council had made a step, and more steps were needed. There was work ahead of her, more than she could currently see the end of. She was 18 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her to do it. The wolf she had never had, the animal spirit that the pack had waited for and that had never come, had been the wrong question. She was not less without it. She was something else entirely. Something that had survived 200 years of being called extinct. Something that grew flowers without trying, and healed through touch, and read the shape of curses from the inside, and wrote letters that people found difficult to dismiss, and negotiated charter documents line by line, until they said what they actually meant. She was silver-blooded. She was the first of her kind in this territory in 200 years. She was Serafina Voss, daughter of Owen, keeper of her mother's heart, reader of small print legal documents, grower of early white flowers with silver-edged petals. She was enough. She had always been enough. The morning was full of light. The river sang below the cliff. The trees in the inner courtyard put their new leaves into the spring air, and leaned, just slightly, in her direction. She let them. That afternoon, Isolde came down to the north garden for the first time. She moved carefully, with the careful confidence of someone who had recently relearned that her body would do what she asked of it. She was dressed in a plain dark green coat that suited her better than the pale formal things she usually wore, and her hair was loose, and her wolf was completely present behind her eyes, bright and alive, and very much done with being still. She stood at the gate of the north garden, and looked at it for a long time. You did this, she said. Serafina looked at the beds, the paths, the early white flowers with their silver edges that had spread from one cluster to cover 3 of the 4 raised beds over the weeks. Edwin was on the far side, working without looking up, giving them space. Edwin and I did most of the work, she said. The rest happened on its own. Isolde looked at the white flowers. She came into the garden slowly, and crouched beside one of the beds, and looked at the flowers closely, without touching them. Silver edges, she said. Yes. How long have you been growing silver-edged flowers? I believe I have been growing them for as long as I have been near plants, Serafina said. I simply did not notice before, because I was not looking carefully, and no one was looking at me. Isolde stood and turned and looked at her with those clear, alert eyes. Thank you, Isolde said. Not for the garden, for everything else. You are welcome, Serafina said. Not for anything specific, for the same everything else. They stood in the garden for a while, side by side, not needing to fill it. Isolde picked up a handful of earth from the open space at the end of one bed and let it fall through her fingers, and the earth was warm, and she looked at it with an expression that said she noticed. Spring is good, Isolde said. Spring is very good, Serafina agreed. They went inside together when the afternoon began to cool, walking through the palace corridors with the easy, unhurried pace of people who knew where they were going and were in no particular rush to arrive. Two people who had, through unlikely circumstances, found their way to the same side of the same complicated story, and had the grace to recognize each other in it. Serafina's mother met them in the corridor near the south wing, and invited them both to tea, which Alara had apparently prepared without asking anyone, on the grounds that it was the sort of afternoon that required tea, and that good instincts were better than waiting for a formal invitation. They sat in Alara's room, the three of them, with the river visible through the window and the afternoon going gently toward evening, and they drank tea and talked about ordinary things, the garden, the spring river, the particular quality of light that came through north-facing windows in the late afternoon. Nothing enormous or consequential, just the comfortable, unguarded conversation of people who were not performing anything. Serafina sat with her cup warming both hands, and looked at the river and thought, this is also what it was supposed to look like. Not just the formal ceremonies, and the legal victories, and the things on the public record. Also this, a warm room, and two people she had come to love, and the light changing outside, and nothing, for this moment, requiring her to be anything, except exactly what she was. She had spent 18 years performing smallness, performing the shape of someone who did not need much space, and did not make demands, and could be placed anywhere, and would simply continue to exist quietly. She was done performing that. She was also, she had discovered, not angry about those 18 years, not in a hot and consuming way. She had been angry, in the early weeks at Greymere, when the full understanding of what had been taken from her settled properly into her comprehension. She had sat with that anger and given it its due, but it had not consumed her, because there was too much ahead that needed her clear attention, and because she had found, on the other side of the anger, something more useful. She had found out what she was made of. 18 years of being told she was nothing had not made her nothing. It had made her extremely good at identifying what was true and what was performance. It had made her very patient, and very thorough, and very careful with words. It had made her capable of walking into a room full of people who held power over her situation, and speaking without her voice shaking. It had made her read the fine print of charter documents, and find the 7 points that needed changing. She was not grateful for the 18 years, but she was not destroyed by them either. That evening, she wrote in her personal journal, something she had started doing at Greymere, because Aldrich had given her a blank book in the second week, with the observation that people who experienced things of historical significance should keep records, and that personal records were as valuable as official ones. She wrote about the ceremony, about the bow, about the handshake, about the senior council documents and what they did and did not mean, and what work remained. She wrote about the garden and Isolde coming to it, and her mother's tea. She wrote, at the end, in her careful, unhurried handwriting, I do not know what the next year looks like, or the year after that. I know the legal work continues, and the territory visits must be planned, and the historical record needs tending, and more people in more packs need to receive accurate information before they will receive it through the distortion of the Lunar Purity Council's position. I know there are complications ahead that I cannot yet see the shape of. I also know that I am in the right place, doing the right things, with the right people around me, with both eyes open. That is more than I have ever had. It is enough. She closed the book. She put it on the shelf beside the books that Aldrich had brought her across years of quiet, caring preparation. She looked at the shelf for a moment, the range of it, the growing line of things she had read, and the few she had started to write. She went to the window and looked at the river in the dark. The spring water was silver white in the moonlight, moving fast over the stones below the cliff. She put her hand flat against the glass, and felt the warmth in her palm, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. Every step of the quiet and unlikely road that had brought a wolfless kitchen girl from the margins of a pack that did not want her to the center of something that was, slowly and imperfectly, and with a great deal of work still ahead, becoming better. She thought about her father's hands, warm around the things he held. She thought about the silver ring that had gone missing after his death, and that she had searched for in Ashvale and never found. She thought about how she would likely never find it, and how that was all right, because what he had left her was in her blood, and not in any object that could be lost. She stayed at the window for a while, watching the river. Then she went to bed and slept well, and woke the next morning to a spring day that was clear and cold and full of light, and she dressed and went to the north garden before breakfast, and crouched beside the white flowers, and pressed her hands into the earth, and felt the warmth move out of her fingers and into the soil, the way it always had, the way it always would. The flowers leaned toward her. She leaned back.